Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Kris, this is Wizard Way, and this is Silmarillion Saturday, where I read the Silmarillion so you don't have to. We discuss it, we put it into context, especially how it relates to the upcoming Amazon Prime Rings of Power TV show. So, we will be covering the Akallabêth today, which is actually really crucial. I'm not sure if we'll make it through the entire thing. It is a pretty long tale, but we finally finished the Quenta Silmarillion last week, which means we are onto the Akalabath. So, just for reference, the Silmarillion as a whole, as a book, is actually a collection of several different stories, including the Quenta Silmarillion, which is what most people normally think of, along with the Ainulindale, which is like the creation myth, the Valaquenta, which is all about the Valar of Tolkien's world, and the Akalabath, as well as the of the Rings of Power in the Third Age. So both of these latter stories are actually really important when it comes to the lore that is behind the Rings of Power TV show. So today's going to be a good stream. We're going to start the Akallabêth, and that's all about the Fall of Numenor. Welcome everybody, welcome everyone over on TikTok. Hi guys. Good morning. Just realized I didn't have my chat bar up. Now it's up. Cool. Welcome everybody. So if you're over on my TikTok channel, please consider going to the link in my bio. Head over to my YouTube channel because number one, that's where I need the minutes watched. So if you want to support me, that's great. Please head over to my YouTube channel. Also, I have an overhead cam for all the illustrations, as well as voice effects that I use for different characters when the opportunity arises. So if you want a fuller, more pleasant experience of me reading the Silm, definitely head to my YouTube channel. It is totally worth it. Alright. How are we doing, everybody? Good morning, Kalurian. We got Jennifer, we got KP Birdman. Oh, nice. Yeah, Saturday afternoon. It is Silmarillion Saturday. Bit later of a stream than I had intended. That is because there was something that was going on sale at a very specific time that I really wanted to snatch, and I did. This is... I don't know how they pronounce their name, but Velgor, over on Twitter. They do... I'm not sure if it's crochet or knitted, but they make little plushies, and they were doing a sale on their site, first one in several months, and they put up a Sauron plushie, and I could not say no. I could not say no to that. So it's a... let's see, like, I don't know if I can find it. If I can, I'm going to bring it up on the screen, maybe. Let me see if I can. Oops. I did just tweet it out on my Twitter, because I'm super excited. I'm so excited. I'm just going to save the image to my desktop, and we'll go from there. Save. Okay, that should work. Alright, browse. Desktop. Okay, there it is. Isn't it cute? So, this is what I bought. I love it. I love it so much. It's so cute. So, that is Sauron from the Silmarillion. I love the red outlines for his eyes. This is him with the crown on. The crown is removable. I actually was like refreshing the site a few minutes early, and so I caught the site as soon as it went live, and I snatched that so fast. So, I know, the smirk is everything. The smirk is totally everything. I'm so excited. There was a Melkor as well. I was super tempted, but this was 105, including shipping, 105 in New Zealand dollars, which I think ends up being somewhere around 75 USD, somewhere around there. Totally worth it. Totally worth it. I was saving up anticipating this. So that is what I bought, and I have zero regrets. Zero regrets, my friends. Totally worth it. But yeah, so that's why I'm late. Is I got myself a Sauron plushie. Because priorities. But they also had the Melkor one. They had an Anatar version of Sauron. The only reason I didn't get more is because Sauron was immediately distinguishable. Like, you could tell what character it was. For Anatar, it's like, it's up to fan interpretation what Anatar looks like. Same thing with, you know, characters like Celebrimbor. The only distinguishing feature of Celebrimbor is his hammer, which brilliantly the artist did shrinking plastic. So they cut out an actual one of Celebrimbor's hammer and then shrank it. And so it's just this chibi little hammer, and it's stuck into his belt. It's so cute. It's so cute. I can't even. Highly recommend. There are still some available. They put up ones from the Silmarillion, The Lord of the Rings, and some from The Witcher. So if you're also a Witcher fan, there was a Yennefer and several characters that I'm not familiar with because I haven't read the Witcher books and I haven't played the Witcher games. I've only seen the Netflix series, which I'm sure is not completely accurate. But yes, so Dhelgor. Dhel. So if you find them over on Twitter, they have the link in their bio on Twitter for their Ko-fi shop. And that's where I bought it. Totally worth it. Shameless promotion. Love their stuff. And watching their process as they make these one by one has just been a joy. So, highly recommend. But today is the Akalabath. So, let's get into where we are currently at. So last week, we finished up the Quinta Silmarillion, which is kind of a big deal. That was a milestone. And honestly, reading cover to cover, this is only my second time. It's only my second time reading the Silm cover to cover, which is bonkers. Yeah, the Feanor one's super cute. There was a work in progress picture of the Feanor one. They also, I don't know why it wasn't in the shop, but they made one of the Teleri ships, quote unquote, and I use air quotes because what they did is they made a swan. Like, it looked like an inflatable pool swan. And the swan just has like two little dots for eyes and then just a straight line for a mouth. So it looked like just like fuck my life kind of expression. Just it just deadpan, complete deadpan of an expression, and so it looks like an inflatable swan, but that is their interpretation of the swan ships of the Teleri. So they had this swan ship, and Feanor, when he was still a work in progress, so all he had was a straight line of a mouth. So they matched. It was the best. Just like it was so good. I was like, you know, if they both have that specific expression, I'm tempted to buy them. So tempted. But the Swan ship was not on the shop when it went live, so I was like, darn. I may have gotten Feanor if I could get the ship with him. Absolutely, that would be hilarious. I would love to see someone cosplay Feanor in a pool with a swan floaty. That'd be funny. Someone needs to do like a college AU. Feanor's like the hot dad of basically this fraternity of brothers, literal fraternity of the Sons of Feanor. If the Sons of Feanor was a fraternity, what would their letters be? Hypothetically. I've never been part of a sorority, fraternity, none of that stuff, so like, when it comes to Greek house naming, what even goes into that? That'd be really fun to learn. Like, what would be the proper designation? Kappa Delta Theta or something. Or would it just be like Alpha Alpha Alpha, nothing but Alpha all day long because Feanor is extra AF? Oh, sweet, you made a We Don't Talk About Sauron parody. That's hilarious. I still have the family Feanor. I need to frickin' film that. I need to film that. I'm gonna put that on my to-do list. Because the music is done. The music has been done for several weeks. But recording it has just been a pain in my ass. So I'll get on that. I'll get on that. It'll be a 3-minute video. I'm gonna have to post it without sound, grab the video, delete it, and then mess with it on my computer to add the sound back in. Because TikTok, Clip Clop, doesn't want me to add a 3-minute audio on my videos, which is dumb, but apparently that's a restriction they have, so I'm gonna have to piecemeal it, ? It's gonna be messy, but I appreciate you guys sticking with me. Yeah, my personal one is We Don't Talk About Maglor, or We Don't Talk About Kano, because Kano was his shortened nickname. And it fits too well. We don't talk about Kano, no. We don't talk about Kano. Sound in, then put audio over it and mute that audio. I'm not understanding. I'm like, mechanics. Oh, I think I know what you mean, where you add in the music on top of it and then mute it. Problem is the background music. Like, I don't want the background music to be playing behind me when I film it. I'm just gonna lip sync it. Yeah, the thing is TikTok audio's cut off after 1 minute. Even on 3-minute videos. Even if the audio is 3 minutes long, it will only let you use the audio for 1 minute. It just cuts it off. Or it deactivates the sound for the entire video, which is what happened last time I tried. So I deleted the video clips down to 1 minute, and suddenly the audio worked again. It's infuriating, but that's the way it works, apparently. So, I'll give it another try. What I'm gonna try and do is just record the entire thing, post it without the audio, and then I'll grab that video from the interwebs and edit it on my computer and repost it with the sound. So, yeah, I've never been able to get it to work with 3-minute audios. Even a 3-minute audio that I myself posted. Because I did that. What a mess. Worth it, though. It's worth it. But anyway, we're several minutes in, we need to get started. So, today's story is going to be the Akallabêth. The Akallabêth is the downfall of Numenor. So, let me get a quick drink, and we'll get into the actual reading. So, we're gonna learn how men, as is their wont, decided they were not content with the gifts that Iluvatar, the one god, gave them. They want to be like the elves. They want immortality. They want to be where all things are ageless. Because that is the one thing that they were not gifted. This is a commentary on mankind. They got greedy. I want it all. I want it now. Or like Veruca Salt. Veruca Salt and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Don't care how, I want it now. Very, very Veruca Salt of them. They got greedy. And much like she goes down the bad egg chute to the furnace. Same thing happens, basically. Spoiler alert. Numenor falls, it sinks in the ocean like Atlantis, and nobody gets what they want. But that is the story we are covering today. It's the Akalabath, the downfall of Numenor. So, let's get started, shall we? This is a really long chapter. I'm not sure if we'll make it, especially starting so late in the day. Oh yeah. Solution when everything gets broken is just to drown it. To just drown it. Drown it in the ocean. That really is sort of Tolkien's way of going, moving on! Moving on. No more stories in Beleriand, it's under the ocean now. No more stories about Numenor, it's under the ocean now. No more stories about the elves, they crossed over the ocean onto a different plane of existence. They're gone now. What's up, Eli? Welcome. We're about to get started. And just before I get started, how are my audio levels? I messed with them a little bit, because I did an ASMR test stream last time I was live, and I messed with my audio, so... Is my voice sounding okay? Is it too loud? Please let me know if it's too loud. And the background music. It sounds like it's at a good level for me, but I never know for sure, so definitely let me know. We sounding good? Cool. Thank you. Thank you, guys. I appreciate the feedback. Alright. We got the deep voice today. Also, as a little bit of an Easter egg, if you tuned into my ASMR stream, I sang a song at one point, or hummed it. And I was like, brownie points if you know the song. The song was All I Ever Wanted from The Prince of Egypt. And given that Passover is currently going on, I thought that was kind of apt. The music from The Prince of Egypt is spectacular. I'm just putting that out there. It really is a beautiful soundtrack. So I was very slowly humming the Gleaming in the Moonlight, cool and clean and all I've ever known, all I ever wanted. That one. 'Cause it's beautiful. That's like my favorite musical part of that entire movie. Ooh, just chills. I love that. Oh yeah, the wind chimes. Yeah, there will definitely be more of that. I also just bought a bunch of stuff for a new project. I'm going to be doing a cross stitch, which I'm probably going to do, like, I'm thinking maybe Sunday afternoons, it'll happen once a week. It might not be on the same day. Yeah, the lullaby is really, yeah, the hush now my baby, be still, love, don't cry. Yeah, that one's really nice too. I can't vocalize that high though. Like, she really gets up there and it's gorgeous, and with my mic set up the way it is, like, I would not be able to belt in my room. I think it would just cut out. The 2-tree mural is doing well. I have the decals for the actual trees up on my wall finally. But I need to, it's another live stream, I need to do another craft stream. I need to paint all of the leaves, and there are hundreds of them. So I have a gold and silver metallic paint. I have these paints that I want to use, but I need to actually paint all of the leaves. That's going to be a process. So probably do a live stream pretty soon. Now, instead of using a sponge stamp, I like the decals. I like the decals that I'm given. And I got them in 2 different green colors, one for each tree. But the way that the trees are... pardon me. The way that the trees are described in the Silmarillion, the undersides of the leaves for Telperion are supposed to be silver, and then the leaves for Lorelin are ringed in gold. So I am going to paint all of the decals. I already tested it. The paint doesn't chip. It's flexible. So that's what I plan on doing. I plan on doing that. Once I get all of the leaves painted, I'll actually start putting the leaves up on my wall. Which I'm really nervous about, because there's no right or wrong way to do it. I don't know how lush I want the trees to be. And once I have all the leaves up, I need to decide if I want to show, like, silver and gold rain coming down out of the leaves. Because that's another visual that's from the Silmarillion. That the light just sort of drips, the liquid that falls from the trees is then gathered in vats of light. It's really cool. So, it's cool. It's cool. It's just gonna take me forever. Worth it. Yes, Gita, you're not hearing any music over on TikTok because it's only piped in through my OBS, which I don't have that hooked up to my phone. It's just through OBS. That's why I keep poking people to please go to my YouTube channel. It's where I need the minutes watched anyway in order to get my AdSense account back. Womp womp. The cross-stitch that I'm doing a Lord of the Rings cross-stitch. It's called Go West, and it is in a sort of abstract stained glass style, but it is, it's just a digital one that I got off of the internet. I do prefer YouTube. Twitch, there's actually no way you can support me. I just stream there so I show up there. But no, if you're able, please switch over to my YouTube. The handle is exactly the same, but if you're gonna watch, I actually get a benefit from it when you're on YouTube, and I don't when you're on Twitch. Sorry, person on TikTok, I am not going to duel live. Not during Silmarillion Saturdays. Alright, shall we get started? Like 25 minutes into the stream? Alright. So this is the Akalabath. The downfall of Numenor. It is said by the Eldar that men came into the world in the time of the shadow of Morgoth, and they fell swiftly under his dominion, for he sent his emissaries among them, and they listened to his evil and cunning words, and they worshipped the darkness and yet feared it. But there were some that turned from evil and left the lands of their kindred and wandered ever westward, for they had heard a rumor that in the west there was a light which the shadow could not dim. The servants of Morgoth pursued them with hatred, and their ways were long and hard. Yet they came at last to the lands that look upon the sea, and they entered Beleriand in the days of the War of the Jewels. The Edain, these were named in the Sindarin tongue, and they became friends and allies of the Eldar, and did deeds of great valor in the war against Morgoth. Aw, thanks guys. Oh, nice, your own composition for Lord of the Rings cross-stitch. That's always a challenge. Like, best of luck, seriously. Of them was sprung, upon the sides of his fathers, bright Erendil, and in the Lay of Erendil it is told how, at the last, when the victory of Morgoth was almost complete, he built his ship Vingolot, that men called Rothinzil, and voyaged upon the unsailed seas, seeking ever for Valinor, for he desired to speak before the powers on behalf of the two kindreds, that the Valar might have pity on them and send them help in their uttermost need. Therefore, by elves and men he is called Erendil the Blessed, for he achieved his quest after long labors and many perils. And from Valinor there came the host of the lords of the west, but Erendil came never back to the lands that he had loved. Which is really sad, because Elrond and Elros were there, and they basically lost their mother and father. In the great battle, when at last Morgoth was overthrown and Thangorodrim was broken, the Edain alone of the kindreds of men fought for the Valar, whereas many others fought for Morgoth. And after the victory of the Lords of the West, those of the evil men who were not destroyed fled back into the east, where many of their race were still wandering in the unharvested lands, wild and lawless, refusing alike the summons of the Valar and of Morgoth. And the evil men came among them, and cast over them a shadow of fear, and they took them for kings. Then the Valar forsook for a time the men of Middle-earth who had refused their summons and had taken the friends of Morgoth to be their masters. And men dwelt in darkness and were troubled by many evil things that Morgoth had devised in the days of his dominion, demons and dragons and misshapen beasts, and the unclean orcs that are mockeries of the children of Iluvatar, and the lot of men was unhappy. Sorry for my stumbles there. Just as a reminder, the orcs were created through torturing, deforming, reforming elves way long ago. So that was one of the first evil, truly evil things that Morgoth did, is from the elves he twisted them into what then became the orcs. They are not elves still. There's no, redeemable... If we're just nice to the orcs, we can make them back into elves again. That's not how it works. They are twisted beyond all recognition. Because that's what Morgoth does. But those are based on the elves. I know they are mockeries of the children of Iluvatar, but they mean the firstborn children of Iluvatar, primarily. They are humanoid, but they were twisted out of elves. This is before men were created. Before men awoke. But Manwë put forth Morgoth and shut him beyond the world in the void. In the void that is without, and he cannot himself return again into the world, present and visible, while the lords of the West are still enthroned. Yet the seeds that he had planted still grew and sprouted, bearing evil fruit, if any would tend them. For his will remained and guided his servants, moving them ever to thwart the will of the Valar and to destroy those that obeyed them. This the lords of the West knew full well. When therefore Morgoth had been thrust forth, they held council concerning the ages that should come after. The Eldar they summoned to return into the West, and those that hearkened to the summons dwelt in the Isle of Eressëa. And there is in that land a haven that is named Avallone, for it is of all cities the nearest to Valinor, and the Tower of Avallone is the first sight that the mariner beholds when at last he draws nigh to the undying lands over the leagues of the sea. To the fathers of men of the 3 faithful houses rich reward was also given. Eonwë came among them and taught them, and they were given wisdom and power and life more enduring than any others of mortal race have possessed. A land was made for the Edain to dwell in, neither part of Middle-earth nor of Valinor, for it was sundered from either by a wide sea. Yet it was nearer to Valinor. It was raised by Ossë out of the depths of the great water, and it was established by Aule and enriched by Yavanna. And the Eldar brought thither flowers and fountains out of Tol Eressëa. That land the Valar called Andor, the land of gift, and the star of Erendil shone bright in the west as a token that all was made ready, and as a guide over the sea. And men marveled to see that silver flame in the paths of the sun. Then the Edain set sail upon the deep waters, following the star. And the Valar laid a peace upon the sea for many days, and sent sunlight and a sailing wind, so that the waters glittered before the eyes of the Edain like rippling glass, and the foam flew like snow before the stems of their ships. But so bright was Rothinzil that even at morning men could see it glimmering in the west, and in the cloudless night it shone alone, for no other star could stand beside it. And setting their course towards it, the Edain came at last over leagues of sea, and saw afar the land that was prepared for them, Andor, the land of gift, shimmering in a golden haze. Then they went up out of the sea, and found a country fair and fruitful, and they were glad. And they called that land Elenna, which is starwards, but also Anadune, which is westerness, Numenor in the High Eldarin tongue. And just as a shameless self-promotion, I am wearing my Team Numenor shirt today. And I spell it in Quenya, in the Quenya mode of the Tengwar, and Numenor is spelt Numenore, which is the High Eldarin tongue. So it is as close to accurate as what we just read. Team Numenor. So if you are Team Numenor, you can find these and the other realms of Second Age Middle-earth over in my website shop in the geeky merch section. Have fun with that. This was the beginning of that people that in the Grey Elven speech are called the Dunadine, the Numenorians, kings among men. But they did not thus escape from the doom of death that Iluvatar had set upon all mankind, and they were mortal still, though their years were long, and they knew no sickness ere the shadow fell upon them. Therefore they grew wise and glorious, and in all things more like to the firstborn than any other of the kindreds of men. And they were tall, taller than the tallest of the sons of Middle-earth, and the light of their eyes was like the bright stars. But their numbers increased only slowly in the land, for though daughters and sons were born to them fairer than their fathers, yet their children were few. Of old, the chief city and haven of Numenor was in the midst of its western coasts, and it was called Andunie, because it faced the sunset. Undun is west. Just a note there. Just in general, anything that has Undun in it, like Andúril, which is Flame of the West, which was Aragorn's sword after it's reforged from the shards of Narsil. Andun or Andur is west in Elvish. Good evening, Mikey. Good evening and welcome. We are reading the Akalabath, just part of the Silmarillion. Okay, so they called the chief city that's on Numenor is called Andúnie because it faces the sunset. But in the midst of the land was a mountain tall and steep, and it was named Meneltarma, the pillar of heaven, and upon it was a high place that was hallowed to Eru Ilúvatar, and it was open and unroofed, and no other temple or fane was there in the land of the Númenóreans. At the feet of the mountain were built the tombs of the kings, and hard by upon a hill was Armenelos, fairest of cities, and there stood the tower and the citadel that was raised by Elros, son of Erendil, whom the Valar appointed to be the first king of the Dunadine. Hi, Gray. Cat break. Hi. What you doing? You just giving me cat butt? This is my board hole. Gray? Turn around. Hey. Uh-huh. Come here. Oh my goodness. Gray. Are you just gonna be a nuisance? You're not even gonna be on camera? He's just in the way. Gray. Should I just leave you there? Are you just gonna stay there? Okay. I guess he's gonna stay there. He'll probably turn around the moment I start reading again. Because that's just what he does. Okay, so Elros, the son of Erendil, was appointed to be the first king of the Dunadine. Now Elros and Elrond, his brother, were descended from the three houses of the Edain, but in part also both from the Eldar and the Maiar, for Idril of Gondolin and Luthien, daughter of Melian, were their foremothers. What did I say? What are you doing? Okay, back to your spot. Okay. Gray. Come on. No. There you go. Good boy. There's my good boy. I love you. I'm going to give you scritches, and then I'm going to continue reading. He's a good boy. My sweet green-eyed boy. If you want more random pictures of my cats, you can find those on my Patreon. He's a pretty boy. Feet? Oh, no problem, Pandora. Welcome. Welcome. And if you guys are over on my TikTok, please consider going to my YouTube channel. You'll be able to see all the illustrations and all the good stuff over there. We will be hitting an illustration pretty soon, in the next couple minutes. Okay. So we're talking about the foremothers of Elrond and Elros, who were Idril of Gondolin and Luthien, the daughter of Melian. The Valar indeed may not withdraw the gift of death, which comes to men from Ilúvatar, but in the matter of the half-elven, Ilúvatar gave to them the judgment. And they judged that to the sons of Eärendil should be given choice of their own destiny. And Elrond chose to remain with the firstborn, and to him the life of the firstborn was granted. But to Elros, But to Elros, who chose to be a king of men, still a great span of years was allotted, many times that of the men of Middle-earth. And all his line, the kings and lords of his royal house, had long life even according to the measure of the Numenorians. But Elros lived 500 years, and ruled the Numenorians 400 years and 10. Thus the years passed, and while Middle-earth went backward, and light and wisdom faded, the Dunadine dwelt under the protection of the Valar, and in the friendship of the Eldar, and they increased in stature, both of mind and body. For though this people used still their own speech, their kings and lords knew and spoke also the Elven tongue, which they had learned in the days of their alliance, and thus they held converse still with the Eldar, whether of Eressëa or of the westlands of Middle-earth. Because remember, the Sindar and Sylvan elves, or I think they're still called the Nandor, but the Sindar, the Sylvan elves, the Nandor, and also some of the Noldor are still in Middle-earth. This is just at the end of the First Age, beginning of the Second Age. So the Dunadine, or the Numenorians, do converse with the elves still. And the lore masters among them also learned the High Eldarin tongue of the Blessed Realm, in which much story and song was preserved from the beginning of the world. And they made letters and scrolls and books, and wrote in them many things of wisdom and wonder in the high tide of their realm, of which all is now forgot. So it came to pass that, beside their own names, all the lords of the Numenorians had also Eldarin names, and the like with the cities and fair places that they founded in Numenor and on the shores of the Hitherlands. Intense itch, sorry. For the Dunadine became mighty in crafts, so that if they had had the mind, they could easily have surpassed the evil kings of Middle-earth in the making of war and the forging of weapons. But they were become men of peace. Above all arts they nourished shipbuilding and seacraft, and they became mariners, whose like never shall be again since the world has diminished. And voyaging upon the wide seas was the chief feat and adventure of their hardy men in the gallant days of their youth. But the lords of Valinor forbade them to sail so far westward that the coasts of Numenor could no longer be seen. And for long the Dunadine were content, though they did not fully understand the purpose of this ban. But the design of Manwë was that the Numenorians should not be tempted to seek for the Blessed Realm, nor desire to overpass the limits set to their bliss, becoming enamored of the immortality of the Valar and the Eldar, and the lands where all things endure. It's so itchy, what on earth? This might be allergies. I don't usually suffer them, but I'm in a new place this year. Things are scratchier than normal. For in those days Valinor still remained in the world visible, and there Ilúvatar permitted the Valar to maintain upon earth an abiding place, a memorial of that which might have been if Morgoth had not cast his shadow on the world. This the Numenorians knew full well, and at times, when all the air was clear and the sun was in the east, they would look out and descry far off in the west a city white shining on a distant shore, and a great harbor and a tower. For in those days the Numenorians were far-sighted. Yet even so it was only the keenest eyes among them that could see this vision, from the Meneltarma, maybe, or from some tall ship that lay off the western coast as far as it was lawful for them to go. For they did not dare to break the ban of the lords of the west, but the wise among them knew that this distant land was not indeed the blessed realm of Valinor, but was Avalone, the havens of the Eldar upon Eressëa, easternmost of the Undying Lands. And thence at times the firstborn still would come sailing to Numenor in oarless boats, as white birds flying from the sunset. And they brought to Numenor many gifts, birds of song, fragrant flowers, and herbs of great value. And cats, apparently. Hi. I love you. Come on. I know. It's like complete. I love you, Gray. I know you want my attention, but I'm reading, sir. Look at him glaring at me. Oh my gosh, that look though. This is why Sauron makes perfect sense as a cat. Hi. I love you, but you need to settle down, Gray. No. Thank you. He's probably going to jump up here again. Oh, thanks, Eli. Yeah, the itchiness of my nose is way more powerful today than typical. Okay, Gray has abandoned us, which is probably for the best. I love you, Gray. Yeah, he's going over to the food. He's like, screw this. I'm only here for the food. Alright, where were we? Okay, it's what the elves brought from Tol Eressëa. Okay. And they brought to Numenor many gifts, birds of song, and fragrant flowers, and herbs of great virtue. And a seedling they brought of Celeborn, the white tree that grew in the midst of Eressëa. And that was in its turn a seedling of Galathelion, the tree of Tuna, the image of Telperion that Yavanna gave to the Eldar in the Blessed Realm. And the tree grew and blossomed in the courts of the king in Armenelos. Nimloth it was named, and flowered in the evening, and the shadows of night it filled with its fragrance. So just note on the trees here, because this is a line of trees, which I will eventually make a TikTok video on. But you have Telperion, the silver tree of the two trees of Valinor, sort of a brother tree that's not quite as splendiferous, if you will, was Galathelion. Galathelion was basically like a brother tree to Telperion. Not as powerful, not as beautiful, not as large. But Galathelion was given to the elves and was put down at Tirion on Tuna. So when they say Tuna, they mean the hill of Tuna, which is where Tirion still stands, in Valinor. So from that one, they got the sapling Celeborn, not the character, but the sapling. And Celeborn was taken to Tol Eressëa, which is the island off the coast of Valinor. And that's where the elves that came over from Middle-earth end up going. So, we have Galathelion, Celeborn, and then this white tree of Numenor is Nimloth. Nimloth means white flower. So just in case all of those names are getting confusing, they are the same line of trees. And from Nimloth we get the white trees of Gondor later on. Thus it was that, because of the ban of the Valar, the voyages of the Dunadine in those days went ever eastward and not westward, from the darkness of the north to the heats of the south, and beyond the south to the nether darkness. And they came even into the inner seas, and sailed about Middle-earth, and glimpsed from their high prows the gates of morning in the east. And the Dunadine came at times to the shores of the great lands, and they took pity on the forsaken world of Middle-earth. And the lords of Numenor set foot again upon the western shores in the dark years of men, and none yet dared to withstand them. For most of the men of that age that sat under the shadow were now grown weak and fearful. And coming among them, the Numenorians taught them many things. Corn and wine they brought, and they instructed men in the sowing of seed, and the grinding of grain, in the hewing of wood and the shaping of stone, and in the ordering of their life, such as it might be in the lands of swift death and little bliss. Then the men of Middle-earth were comforted, and here and there upon the western shores of the houseless woods drew back, and men shook off the yoke of the offspring of Morgoth, and unlearned their terror of the dark. And they revered the memory of the tall sea kings, and when they had departed they called them gods, hoping for their return. For at that time the Numenorians dwelt never long in Middle-earth, nor made there as yet any habitation of their own. Eastward they must sail, but ever west their hearts returned. Sorry about that. Sending chaos vibes to the cats, basically. I really like that line, eastward they must sail, but ever west their hearts returned. Because they weren't allowed to go west with their ships. But they always felt most at home in Numenor, so they tended to return there rather than make their own dwellings in Middle-earth at this point. Now this yearning grew ever greater with the years, and the Numenorians began to hunger for the undying city that they saw from afar, and the desire of everlasting life, to escape from death and the ending of delight, grew strong upon them, and ever as their power and glory grew greater, their unquiet increased. For though the Valar had rewarded the Dunadine with long life, they could not take from them the weariness of the world that comes at last. And they died, even their kings of the seed of Erendil. And the span of their lives was brief in the eyes of the Eldar. Thus it was that a shadow fell upon them, in which maybe the will of Morgoth was at work that still moved in the world. And the Numenorians began to murmur, at first in their hearts and then in open words, against the doom of men, and most of all against the ban which forbade them to sail into the west. We're coming up on some voice effects. And then we have illustrations to share too. And they said amongst themselves,
"Why do the lords of the West sit there in peace unending, while we must die and go we know not whither, leaving our home and all that we have made? And the Eldar die not, even those that rebelled against the lords. And since we have mastered all seas, and no water is so wild or so wide that our ships cannot overcome it, why should we not go to Avalon, or Avalone, and greet there our friends?"
And some there were who said,
"Why should we not go even to Aman, and taste there, were it but for a day, the bliss of the powers? Have we not become mighty among the people of Arda?"
"Hi, Gray. You getting testy now?" He's going to be an issue all stream. Don't do it, Gray. No, you're going to claw up my bed instead. Gray! see that tail swishing. The tail of annoyance. Hi, Maggie. Welcome, and feel free to jump on over to my YouTube channel. That's where you get to see and hear all the good stuff. Alright, where were we? Ah yes, have we not become mighty among the people of Arda? The Eldar reported these words to the Valar, and Manwë was grieved, seeing a cloud gather on the noontide of Numenor. And he sent messengers to the Dunadine, who spoke earnestly to the king, and to all who would listen concerning the fate and fashion of the world.
The doom of the world,
they said.
One alone can change who made it. And were you so to voyage that, escaping all deceits and snares, you came indeed to Aman, the blessed realm, little would it profit you, for it is not the land of Manwë that makes its people deathless, but the deathless that dwell therein have hallowed the land. And there you would but wither and grow weary the sooner, as moths in a light too strong and steadfast.
Gray, stop it. But the king said,
And does not Erendil, my forefather, live? Or is he not in the land of Aman?
To which they answered,
You know that he has a fate apart, and was adjudged to the firstborn who die not. Yet this also is his doom, that he can never return again to mortal lands. Whereas you and your people are not of the firstborn, but are mortal men as Iluvatar made you. Yet it seems that you desire now to have the good of both kindreds, to sail to Valinor when you will, and to return when you please to your homes. That cannot be. Nor can the Valar take away the gifts of Iluvatar. The Eldar, you say, are unpunished, and even those who rebel do not die. Yet that is to them neither reward nor punishment, but the fulfillment of their being. They cannot escape, and are bound to this world, never to leave it so long as it lasts, for its life is theirs. And you are punished for the rebellion of men, you say, in which you had small part, and so it is that you die. But that was not at first appointed for a punishment. Thus you escape and leave the world, and are not bound to it in hope or in weariness. Which of us, therefore, should envy the others?
And the Numenorians answered,
Why should we not envy the Valar, or even the least of the deathless? For of us is required a blind trust, and a hope without assurance, knowing not what lies before us in a little while, and yet we also love the earth, and would not lose it.
And then the messengers said,
Indeed, the mind of Iluvatar concerning you is not known to the Valar, and he has not revealed all things that are to come. But this we hold to be true, that your home is not here, neither in the land of Aman nor anywhere within the circles of the world, and the doom of men, that they should depart, was at first a gift of Iluvatar. It became a grief to them only because, coming under the shadow of Morgoth, it seemed to them that they were surrounded by a great darkness, of which they were afraid. And some grew willful and proud and would not yield until life was reft from them. We who bear the ever-mounting burden of the years do not clearly understand this, but if that grief has returned to trouble you, as you say, then we fear that the shadow rises once more and grows again in your hearts. Therefore, though you be the Dunadine, fairest of men, who escaped from the shadow of old and fought valiantly against it, we say to you, beware. The will of Eru may not be gainsaid. And the Valar bid you earnestly not to withhold the trust to which you are called, lest soon it become again a bond by which you are constrained. Hope rather that in the end even the least of your desires shall have fruit. The love of Arda was set in your hearts by Ilúvatar, and he does not plant to no purpose. Nonetheless, many ages of men unborn may pass ere that purpose is made known, and to you it will be revealed, and not to the Valar.
Sorry, I completely lost my space. There it is. I'm glad you like the voice effects. I always worry that, like, I'm gonna miss a button, and then, like, that entire section of dialogue will be muted by accident. I think that happened once, where I turned on the Valar voice.
You know, this one.
And when I did that, I forgot to switch it off, and so there's an entire section of one of the chapters that was read in that voice. It's barely understandable because there's so much reverb. So, I try to keep things straight. And yes, I did make the king of the Numenorians into the girl voice. I gave him the Valley Girl voice because I just needed some sort of variance, and he only has a couple lines. So, Vardamir is a sissy girl. Which he should not be ashamed of in the slightest. Yeah, they decided to finish that chapter. Total vibe. These things took place in the days of Tar Kiryatan, the shipbuilder, and of Tar Atanamir, his son. And they were proud men, eager for wealth, and they laid upon the men of Middle-earth. And they laid the men of Middle-earth under tribute, taking now rather than giving. It was to Tar Atanamir that the messengers came, and he was the 13th king, and in his day the realm of Numenor had endured for more than 2,000 years, and was come to the zenith of its bliss, if not yet of its power. But Atanamir was ill-pleased with the counsel of the messengers, and gave little heed to it, and the greater part of his people followed him. For they wished still to escape death in their own day, not waiting upon hope. And Atanamir lived to a great age, clinging to his life beyond the end of all joy, and he was the first of the Numenorians to do this, refusing to depart until he was witless and unmanned, and denying to his son the kingship at the height of his days. For the lords of Numenor had been wont to wed late in their long lives, and to depart and leave the mastery to their sons when these were come to full stature of body and mind. So I do want to pause there because we do have a couple illustrations to share, but also because I want it to be noted that this is over 2,000 years. That's a huge chunk of time, okay? We're at the 13th king of Numenor at this point, so there's been a big jump in time here. So that's the 13th king after Elros, brother of Elrond. So, 2,000 years is a long time, and just as a mental note, Barad-dûr, like Sauron's tower in Middle-earth, was completed in 1600, or 1650. 1650, I believe it is, of the Second Age. So this is past that. This is after even the building of Barad-dûr. So at this point, Sauron has has waged war upon the elves of Middle-earth again. So we've really, really jumped forward in time. This is after the creation of the Rings of Power. Okay? Like, we've really jumped. Just putting that... because, he just sort of offhandedly says, oh yeah, it's 2,000 years into the whole Numenorian thing. Without giving context to the fact that an awful lot has happened in Middle-earth in those 2,000 years. So I wanted to put that into perspective because it's a big, big time jump there. So it is worth noting that this will put it in a bit of a controversial light, but what we're talking about here with the Numenorians and with men in general of the Elder Days is they sort of assisted suicide. Because elves and men are both given the ability to just will themselves unalived. They can do that. And it's the tradition of men to actually do that, to willfully go into death before old age and senility set in. So this is, tradition. This is totally normal for the men of Middle-earth, is to reach a certain age where they know they're past their prime, and they just let life go. Because, there's a line that Aragorn says where he says, I do not fear death, right? Or I do not... I think it's him who says it. I know Éowyn also says it. But Aragorn, he doesn't fear death, because death is nothing to be afraid of. Once you're dead, you're dead. And the men of the world have been promised that there is an appointed afterlife for them. They don't know what it is or where they go, and no one ever knows what it is or where they go, which is probably a smart thing that Tolkien did. But it's been appointed to them. That this is a gift. It's a gift that you don't last forever, like the elves do. Because the elves grow weary of the world. Because they're tied to it. They can never escape. And so you end up with the elves envying the mortality of men, because what an adventure that would be for an elf who's world-weary. But then you have the men who envy the elves, the immortality of the elves, because they feel like, well, if there's some ultimate fate or wisdom that's going to come from these long years, because we're so short-lived, we don't get to enjoy it. And how is that fair? So there's a lot of contention between the two races, but it's just by their very nature they were intended to be different. But it's hard for men to appreciate that when they feel like they've been given the short end of the stick, right? Okay, so we have a break coming up in a few more paragraphs, and then I'll show you all of the illustrations that we've passed so far. Okay, so just to recap, for the lords of Numenor had been wont to wed late in their long lives and depart and leave the mastery to their sons when these were come to full stature of body and mind. When Tar an Calimon, son of Antanamir, became king, and he was of like mind. Oh, sorry, I completely botched that. Let me try that again. Then Tar an Calimon, son of Atanamir, became king, and he was of like mind. And in his day the people of Numenor became divided. On the one hand was the greater party, and they were called the Kingsmen, and they grew proud and were estranged from the Eldar and the Valar. And on the other hand was the lesser party, and they were called the Elendili, the elf friends. For though they remained loyal indeed to the king and the house of Elros, they wished to keep the friendship of the Eldar, and they hearkened to the counsel of the lords of the West. Nonetheless, even they, who named themselves the Faithful, did not wholly escape from the affliction of their people, and they were troubled by the thought of death. Definitely allergies. Thus the bliss of Westernesse became diminished, but still its might and splendor increased, for the kings and their people had not yet abandoned wisdom, and if they loved the Valar no longer, at least they still feared them. They did not dare openly to break the ban or to sail beyond the limits that had been appointed. Eastwards still they steered their tall ships, but the fear of death grew ever darker upon them, and they delayed it by all means that they could. And they began to build great houses for their dead, while their wise men labored unceasingly to discover, if they might, the secret of recalling life, or at the least of the prolonging of men's days. Yet they achieved only the art of preserving incorrupt the dead flesh of men, and they filled all the land with silent tombs in which the thought of death was enshrined in the darkness. But those that lived turned more eagerly to pleasure and revelry, desiring ever more goods and more riches. And after the days of Tar and Calimon, the offering of the first fruits to Eru was neglected, and men went seldom any more to the Hallow upon the heights of Meneltarma in the midst of the land. Thus it came to pass that in that time Thus it came to pass in that time that the Numenorians first made great settlements upon the west shores of the ancient lands. For their own land seemed to them shrunken, and they had no rest or content therein, and they desired now wealth and dominion in Middle-earth, since the west was denied. Great harbors and strong towers they made, and there many of them took up their abode. But they appeared now rather as lords and masters and gatherers of tributes than as helpers and teachers. And the great ships of the Numenorians were borne east on the winds and returned ever laden, and the power and majesty of their kings were increased, and they drank and they feasted, and they clad themselves in silver and gold. In all this the elf friends had small part. They alone came now ever to the north, and the land of Gil-galad, keeping their friendship with the elves and lending them aid against Sauron, and their haven was Pelargir, above the mouths of Anduin the Great. But the king's men sailed far away to the south, and the lordships and strongholds that they made have left many rumors in the legends of men. There's a place to pause there, so we're going to pause so we can show you all the pretty pictures. There have been 2 illustrations thus far, so let's switch things over so you guys can see them. Okay. So I'm going to zoom in here. So this, I believe, is meant to be Vingolot, which is Erendil's ship. It also has his crest. That is his heraldry. So, we do have that. Relatively simple picture. Just a bunch of skyscape up above. And then the next one is horizontal, so I'll switch things up again. There we go. So that right there is Numenor. So that would be Meneltarma. I'm spacing out on the names of things. Oh my goodness. It's my mouse getting in the way. No. Oh my goodness. Okay, there we go. Sorry guys. That fumble with my mouse cost me. Okay. So yes, we have their main city here. But you do have this is quite a good amount of land in here. You have their port and their ships, and this is sort of the hallowed space that they've given to give tribute to Eru. Though that doesn't happen nearly as often later on. So in this mountain they've delved all of the graves for their kings. But like they said, typically, in ages past at least, the Numenorians gave up their lives before they reached, like, too far gone old age. But that has changed, and because of that, even though they don't reproduce and have a bunch of kids, because before their numbers were slow to increase, but now because people aren't dying, they aren't choosing to let go of life, you're ending up with a population surge. So there are a lot more people now, and so Numenor feels shrunken to them. Numenor feels like it's really tiny and crowded, because people who normally would have kicked it by then, on purpose, are trying to cling to life as long as possible. And we all know how, you know, not every single person who gets old gets kind of crazy, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean when people reach a certain age, their faculties start to go, and that's normal. That's normal. But typically with the Numenorians, they would choose death before that would happen. And so now we're ending up with a lot of crazy old folks who are still in charge because they haven't given the kingship to their, you know, to their younger sons who are in their prime. So, people clinging to life and staying in power longer than they should. Gee, does that sound familiar? Story of our lives, isn't it? But those are the two illustrations thus far, and we'll probably hit some more before we end for the day. So, back to the normal view. Okay. So we've gone about 10 pages in. I think this is a 30-page chapter. Yeah. So we're only about a third of the way through. There's a lot going on. Hey, Raid! Welcome, guys! Hi, everybody! I see Claw, I see Nerdly Niffler. Hey, guys! I'm like, wait, I've got a sound effect for this. I do. Just haven't played in freaking forever. We'll see if it goes.
Hi, guys!
So we are reading the Silmarillion. We are on the Akalabath, which is all about the Fall of Numenor. This is basically Tolkien's version of the story of Atlantis. So even if you are not at all familiar with Tolkien, this is basically an Atlantis story. We were just talking about how men are getting jealous of elves, which, you know, like you do. Men are getting jealous of the immortality of elves because Ilúvatar, the one god in Tolkien's world, gave the gift of mortality to men. He intended them to only last a short period of time. This is a good thing, because the elves are over here tied to the existence of the earth itself. They can't escape the world. You know, like, they're around until the world literally ends, which you can imagine how world-weary the elves become. So the elves are sort of envious that men have a way out, and men are envious that the elves are immortal. So we've got this sort of push and pull going on. And so the kings of men, the Numenorian kings, used to willingly give up their lives when they would reach a certain age. So they would get married late in life. They had longer lifespan than normal men, so we're talking in the 100 to 200 year range. Longer than typical. But they had a longer lifespan, so they would marry relatively late, and once they would have children and those children would be full grown, they would relinquish all of their titles to their kids and then willfully pass away. This is what Aragorn ends up doing at the end of The Lord of the Rings, after he's ruled as, king of Gondor. After Sauron is destroyed, he has Eldarion and several daughters, and he willfully gives up his life. He just poof. Because it's basically like assisted suicide. They reach a certain age, and then it is just sort of societally expected that they're just going to see themselves out. Aragorn does that, and then Arwen follows a year later, like exactly a year later. Because, fun fact, random Lord of the Rings fact here for you, is that Aragorn lets go of life on his birthday, when he is 210 years old. So, he lives for a while. But he willfully lets go. And so he lets go on his exact birthday, which is March 1st of the year 120 of the Fourth Age. So he lives for a while, he rules for a while, but he gives up kingship to his son and kicks it. Like you do. The Numenorians did this so that their minds wouldn't start going. Because you know how, like, not all old people, but most old people, your faculties start going. It's part of the natural decline of life, right? The Numenorians would let go before that happened. But right now in the story, because the Numenorians are starting to get really envious of the elves, they are not letting go of life willingly, which means that it has to be wrenched from them, due to old age. But they get old and decrepit and senile. So we are having a certain population boom, if you will, because they're having kids, but they're not choosing to die. So people are holding on to their titles and their power, and we're ending up with a much older, stubborn population that's in power rather than giving that power to the younger generation. So this does not bode well. And so we have two factions of mortal men at this point, the Numenorians. There are the Kingsmen, and the Kingsmen are the ones who don't want to let go of life. They envy the elves. They eventually want to go over to Valinor, even though they don't dare at the moment because they've been banned from Valinor. They're not supposed to go there. But they're getting to that point where they're thinking, we want immortality. How can we get immortality? So that is the Kingsmen. And then the second sect is called the Elf Friends, the Elendili, which they call themselves the Faithful. So you got the Kingsmen and you got the Faithful. The Faithful are like, dude, we're listening to the people who come out of Valinor. We're listening to them. Like, if this is supposed to be a gift, the life that we have, rather than the life that we see the elves enjoying, then we need to just trust that that's the case. These are the gods we're talking to, right? One would hope they know what they're talking about. The ultimate fate of men was not even given to the Valar. And they openly say as much. They're like, we don't know your ultimate fate because it wasn't knowledge given to us. It's supposed to be your mystery and your gift, and you just need to trust that. Men don't do too well with trust. Has anything changed, really? So that's where we're currently at. So we're a little over 2,000 years into the Second Age at this point. A lot is going down in Middle-earth. We're having a big conflict with Sauron yet again, because this is when he first makes the Ring of Power. So he's given the rings out to the others. Celebrimbor hid the 3. He gave 2 of them to Gil-galad, who's the Elven King of the Noldor at that time, and he gave 1 ring to Galadriel. He then is betrayed by Sauron and slain in a really, like Sauron didn't have to go that hard, but he chose to. Sauron turns Celebrimbor into his battle flag. He skewers him and rides him into battle against the other elves, which is super fucking metal. So good for him, I guess, but it's so metal. Definitely the most metal thing I think Sauron ever does is skewer one that he had called friend for quite a long period of time. Maybe lover? ? It's never stated up front what the relationship between Sauron and Celebrimbor was, but, you know, we are secret lovers. I think they're lovers. Personal opinion. So he got really, like, he went there. Like, he not only betrayed Celebrimbor, but I think that after having Celebrimbor put to death, because he doesn't do it himself, he has him put to death by the orcs or what have you, his generals, his followers. He has Celebrimbor put to death, and then he puts him, like, on a spear and rides him into battle against the other elves. Like, that is trauma. That is, I just had to kill my lover for this cause, and it has destroyed me, and I want everyone to hurt as much as I'm hurting right now. So that's what Sauron does. Super metal, yay Sauron. And while this all is happening, we have the men of Numenor kind of dealing with their own issues completely apart. The only ones who are still connected to the elves and to whatever is happening in Middle-earth with Sauron are the faithful. So the faithful sect, not the Kingsmen, but the faithful, are the only ones really keeping in touch with the elves and being like, hey, we're going to give you as much aid as we possibly can against Sauron. So they're actually engaging with the elves. The Kingsmen are in their own little world dealing with their own greed and lust for immortality. That's where we at right now. Oh, no problem, Larson. I'm glad you're here. It doesn't matter. You can always watch the replay. Replay. Alright. So, we're going to get into what's happening in Middle-earth now, because we've reached a bit of a page break here. In this age, as is elsewhere told, Sauron arose again in Middle-earth, and grew, and turned back to the evil in which he was nurtured by Morgoth, becoming mighty in his service. Already in the days of Tar Minastir, the 11th king of Numenor, had he fortified the land of Mordor, and built there the Tower of Barad-dûr. So this is around 1600, 1650 of the Second Age. And thereafter he strove ever for the dominion of Middle-earth, to become a king over all kings, and as a god unto men. And Sauron hated the Númenóreans because of the deeds of their fathers and their ancient alliance with the elves and allegiance to the Valar. Nor did he forget that the aid of Tar Minastir had rendered to Gil-galad of old, in that time when the One Ring was forged, and there was war between Sauron and the elves in Eriador. Now he learned that the kings of Numenor had increased in power and splendor, and he hated them the more, and he feared them, lest they should invade his lands and wrest from him the dominion of the east. But for a long time he did not dare to challenge the lords of the sea, and he withdrew from the coasts. Yet Sauron was ever guileful. He is guileful. That's a great descriptor for Sauron. Yet Sauron was ever guileful, and it is said that among those whom he ensnared with the 9 rings, 3 were great lords of Numenorian race. And when the Ulairi, those who were the ring wraiths, his servants, and the strength of his terror and mastery over men had grown exceedingly great, he began to assail the strong places of the Numenorians upon the shores of the sea. In those days the shadow grew deeper upon Numenor, and the lives of the kings of the house of Elros waned because of their rebellion, but they hardened their hearts the more against the Valar. And the 20th king took the scepter of his fathers, and he ascended the throne in the name of Udunachor, Lord of the West, forsaking the elven tongues and forbidding their use in his hearing. That's a big step. Forbidding the languages of your forefathers is a big step. Yet in the Scroll of Kings, the name Hernumen was inscribed in the High Elven speech because of ancient custom, which the kings feared to break utterly, lest evil befall. So he does still have a High Eldarin name. And you get used to this because Elendil, Isildur, Anarion, we're familiar with Isildur from The Lord of the Rings. He's the one who cut the ring off Sauron's hand. All of those names are Elvish. Those are Elvish names. So the Numenorians had their own language, but the kings all took Elvish names. So this is another point here where they're still taking Elvish names because they kind of fear to break that tradition. It seems like one step too far. But he's forbidding the language of the elves in general to be used, even though he still has an Elvish name. Now this title seemed to the faithful over proud, being the title of the Valar. Because remember, his name is Hernumen. It's High Elven for basically like Lord of the West, which is what the Valar are. They are the Lords of the West. So they're like, that's a stretch. Anything with Eru in it means the one. So he's basically calling himself a god. It's not a good look. Not a vibe. So they deem it over-proud, being the title of the Valar, and their hearts were sorely tried between their loyalty to the House of Elros and their reverence of the appointed powers. But worse was yet to come, for Ar-Gimilzur, the 23rd king, was the greatest enemy of the faithful. In his day the White Tree was untended and began to decline, and he forbade utterly the use of elven tongues, and punished those that welcomed the ships of Ersea, that still came secretly to the west shores of the land. Now the Elendili dwelt mostly in the western regions of Numenor, but Ar-Gimilzur commanded all that he could discover to be of this party to remove from the west and dwell in the east of the land, and there they were watched. So he's basically forcing people to relocate so that he can keep them under thumb. And the chief dwelling of the faithful in the later days was thus nigh to the harbor of Romena. Thence many set sail to Middle-earth, seeking the northern coasts where they might still speak with the Eldar in the kingdom of Gil-galad. So remember, Gil-galad is the elven king of the Noldor over in Middle-earth. So some of them are willingly leaving Numenor at this point, because they're like, well, we can't even speak the language of our forefathers. Let's just go talk to the elves. But they feel torn in heart because they want to stay loyal to their king, but they don't want to leave behind the tradition of being friends with the elves. This was known to the kings, but they hindered it not, the removal of some people into Middle-earth. So long as the Elendili departed from their land and did not return, for they desired to end all friendship between their people and the Eldar of Eressëa, whom they named the spies of the Valar, hoping to keep their deeds and their counsels hidden from the lords of the West. But all that they did was known to Manwë, and the Valar were wroth with the kings of Numenor, and gave them counsel and protection no more. And the ships of Eressëa came never again out of the sunset, and the havens of Andúnië were forlorn. Highest in honor after the house of the kings were the lords of Andúnië, for they were of the line of Elros, being descended from Silmarillion, daughter of Tar Elendil, the fourth king of Numenor. And these lords were loyal to the kings and revered them. And the lord of Andúnië was ever among the chief counselors of the scepter. Yet also from the beginning they bore especial love to the Eldar and reverence for the Valar. And as the shadow grew, they aided the faithful as they could. But for long they did not declare themselves openly, and sought rather to amend the hearts of the lords of the scepter with wiser counsels. There was a lady, Inzilbeth, renowned for her beauty, and her mother was Lindorie, sister of Earendur, the lord of Andúnië, in the days of Ar-Sakalthor, father of Ar-Gimilzor. Gimilzor is the only name we've heard thus far, okay? So this is calling back to Gimilzor. He's the 23rd king, and he's the one who completely bans the use of Elvish, utterly. So we're talking relatives of that line. This is a lot of names, I understand, and I apologize. So the lady's name is Inzilbeth. Inzilbeth. Just kind of like Elizabeth, right? So her name is Inzilbeth. So she's basically like a cousin, a second cousin, I think. She's like a second cousin of Ar-Gimilzor, if I'm doing the math correctly in my head. Gimilzor took her to wife, though this was little to her liking, for she was in heart one of the faithful, being taught by her mother. But the kings and their sons were grown proud and not to be gainsaid in their wishes. No love was there between Ar-Gimilzor and his queen, nor between their sons. Inziladun, the elder, was like his mother in mind as in body, but Gimilchad, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, KHs, I'm not sure how they are supposed to be pronounced. Gimilchad, the younger, went with his father, unless he were yet prouder and more willful. To him, Ar-Gimilzor would have yielded the scepter rather than to the elder son if the laws had allowed. Ooh, so we got sibling rivalry. But when Inziladun, my bad. Inziladun, the elder of the two, acceded to the scepter, he took again the title in the elven tongue as of old, calling himself Tar Palantir, for he was far-sighted both in eye and in mind, and even those that hated him feared his words as those of a true seer. He gave peace for a while to the faithful, and he went once more at due seasons to the hollow of Eru upon Meneltarma, which is the upper tower that has been built at the peak of the one mountain in Numenor. So this is a sacred place that they would give tribute to the one god. The recent kings have not been doing that, but Inziladun has been doing that, or Tar Palantir. Again, we have multiple names for the same character. So he's going once more at due seasons to the hollow of Eru upon Meneltarma, which Ar-Gimilzor had forsaken. The white tree he tended again with honor, and he prophesied, saying that when the tree perished, then also would the line of the kings come to its end. But his repentance was too late to appease the anger of the Valar, with the insolence of his fathers, of which the greater part of his people did not repent. and Gimilchad, his younger brother, was strong and ungentle, and he took the leadership of those that had been called the Kingsmen, and opposed the will of his brother as openly as he dared, and yet more in secret. Thus the days of Tar Palantir became darkened with grief, and he would spend much of his time in the west, and there ascended often the ancient power of King Minastir, upon the hill of Ormet high to Andunier, whence he gazed westward in yearning, hoping to see maybe some sail upon the sea. This is where they used to look out, and only the people with really good eyesight could see the shores of Tol Eressëa, but that is the elvish island off the coast of Valinor. So he's going up there and looking and just hoping that he sees some sort of ships coming out of the west again, which is what used to happen when they were openly friends with the elves. That has been spoiled, and the Valar are not allowing the elves to sail to Numenor at all. Whence he gazed westward in yearning, hoping to see maybe some sail upon the sea. But no ship came ever again from the west to Numenor, and Avalone was veiled in cloud. Avalone is the port and tower that they can see on Tol Eressëa from afar. I realize there are a ton of names here. If you get confused, flail in the chat and I'll try to answer any questions. Now Gimilchad died 2 years before his 200th year, which was accounted an early death for one of Elros's line, even in its waning. But this brought no peace to the king, for Pharazôn, son of Gimilchad, had become a man yet more restless and eager for wealth and power than his father. He had fared often abroad, as a leader in the wars that the Numenorians made in the coastlands of Middle-earth, seeking to extend their dominion over men, and thus he had won great renown as a captain both by land and by sea. Therefore, when he had come back to Numenor, hearing of his father's death, the hearts of the people were turned to him, for he brought with him great wealth, and was for the time free in his giving. And it came to pass that Tar Palantir grew weary of grief and died. He had no son, but a daughter only, whom he named Miriel in the elven tongue. And to her now by right and the laws of the Numenorians came the scepter. But Pharazôn took her to wife against her will, doing evil in this, and evil also in that the laws of Numenor did not permit the marriage, even in the royal house. They were first cousins. These are first cousins now. So we had a second cousin wedding by force earlier. And now we have first cousins wedding by force. This was not her choice. Boo. Boo, men. So, weddings between kin that close, second cousins can sometimes be allowed. It's still usually considered too close of kin. But this is a first cousin. They do not do that. That is considered far too close of kin. It's not good. Okay. But Pharazôn took her to wife against her will, doing evil in this and evil also in that the laws of Numenor did not permit the marriage, even in the royal house, of those more nearly akin than cousins in the second degree. Hey, that's what I just said. And when they were wedded, he seized the scepter into his own hand, taking the title of Ar-Pharazôn, Tar-Calion in the elven tongue, and the name of his queen he changed to Ar-Zimrafel. The mightiest and proudest was Ar-Pharazôn the Golden of all those that had wielded the scepter of the Sea Kings since the foundation of Numenor, and 24 kings and queens had ruled the Numenorians before, and slept now in their deep tombs under the mount of Meneltarma, lying upon beds of gold. and sitting upon his craven throne in the city of Armenelos, in the glory of his power, he brooded darkly, thinking of war. For he had learned in Middle-earth of the strength of the realm of Sauron, and of his hatred of Westernesse. And now there came to him the masters of ships and captains returning out of the east, and they reported that Sauron was putting forth his might, since Ar-Pharazôn had gone back from Middle-earth, and he was pressing down upon the cities by the coasts, and he had taken now the title of King of Men, and declared his purpose to drive the Númenóreans into the sea, and destroy even Numenor, if that might be. Sauron's the ambitious sort. Great was the anger of Ar-Pharazôn at these tidings, and as he pondered long in secret, his heart was filled with the desire of power unbounded, and the sole dominion of his will. And he determined, without counsel of the Valar, or the aid of any wisdom but his own, that the title of King of Men he would himself claim, and would compel Sauron to become his vassal and his servant. Good luck with that. For in his pride he deemed that no king should ever arise so mighty as to vie with the heir of Erendil. Therefore he began in that time to smithy great hoard of weapons, and many ships of war he built and stored them with his arms. And when all was made ready, he himself set sail with his host into the east. And men saw his sails coming out of the sunset, dyed as with scarlet and gleaming with red and gold. And fear fell upon the dwellers by the coasts, and they fled far away. But the fleet came at last to the place that was called Umbar, where was the mighty haven of the Númenóreans that no hand had wrought. Empty and silent were all the lands about when the King of the Sea marched upon Middle-earth. For 7 days he journeyed with banner and trumpet, and he came to a hill, and he went up. And he set there his pavilion and his throne, and he sat him down in the midst of the land, and the tents of his host were ranged all about him, blue, golden, and white, as a field of tall flowers. Then he sent forth heralds, and he commanded Sauron to come before him and swear to him fealty. And Sauron came. Even from his mighty tower of Barad-dûr he came, and made no offer of battle, for he perceived that the power and majesty of the kings of the sea surpassed all rumor of them, so that he could not trust even the greatest of his servants to withstand them, and he saw not his time yet to work his will with the Dunadine. And he was crafty, well skilled to gain what he would by subtlety when force might not avail. Therefore he humbled himself before Ar-Pharazôn and smoothed his tongue, and men wondered, for all that he said seemed fair and wise. Sauron. This is why I love Sauron so much. I'm sorry, but your story's only as good as your bad guy, and Sauron is such a good bad guy. He's so cunning. I mean, Morgoth had a couple of these tactics, but he only had these tactics because Sauron was his first in command, right? Sauron was his second, and Sauron is cunning like this. This is what he does. He is Sauron of the Silver Tongue. You can't trust this guy. But he makes everything sound so good. Alright, and men wondered, for all that he said seemed fair and wise. But Ar-Pharazôn was not yet deceived, and it came into his mind that for the better keeping of Sauron and of his oaths of fealty, he should be brought to Numenor, there to dwell as a hostage for himself and all his servants in Middle-earth. To this Sauron assented, as one constrained. Yet in his secret thought he received it gladly, for it chimed indeed with his desire. And Sauron passed over the sea and looked upon the land of Numenor. And on the city of Armenelos in the days of its glory he was astounded. But his heart within was filled the more with envy and hate. Exactly. Great point. And Sauron came. Really interesting parallel to, and Morgoth came from the Silmarillion. And you're referencing when Morgoth comes at the summons of Fingolfin. So Fingolfin, the second son of Finwë, once he is given kingship, he is so dismayed at one of the really bad losses, one of the bad battles where the elves lose. He's so dismayed by it that he takes up his arms and he challenges Morgoth to single combat. Morgoth comes in a position of power but unwillingly. Sauron comes in a position of weakness but willingly. Exactly. Isn't it so good? It's subtlety like that with Tolkien. Like, you pick this stuff up, and Sauron came. Great catch. I love it. I love it so much. Alright. So he received it gladly, for it chimed indeed with his desire. And Sauron passed over the sea and looked upon the land of Numenor, and on the city of Armenelos in the days of its glory, and he was astounded, but his heart within was filled the more with envy and hate. Yet such was the cunning of his mind and mouth, and the strength of his hidden will, that ere 3 years had passed he had become closest to the secret counsels of the king, for flattery sweet as honey was ever on his tongue, and knowledge he had of many things yet unrevealed to men. And seeing the favor that he had of their lord, all counselors began to fawn upon him, save one alone, Amandil, lord of Andúnie. Then slowly a change came over the land, and the hearts of the elf friends were sorely troubled, and many fell away out of fear. And although those that remained still called themselves the faithful, their enemies named them rebels. For now, having the ears of men, Sauron with many arguments gainsaid all that the Valar had taught. And he bade men think that in the world, in the east and even in the west, there lay yet many seas and many lands for their winning, wherein was wealth uncounted. And still, if they should at the last come to the end of those lands and seas, beyond all lay the ancient darkness.
And out of it the world was made, for darkness alone is worshipful, and the Lord thereof may yet make other worlds to be gifts to those that serve him, so that the increase of their power shall find no end.
And Ar-Pharazôn said,
Who is the Lord of Darkness?
Then behind locked doors Sauron spoke to the king, and he lied, saying,
It is he whose name is not now spoken, for the Valar have deceived you concerning him, putting forward the name of Eru, a phantom devised in the folly of their hearts, seeking to enchain men in servitude to themselves, for they are the oracle of this Eru, which speaks only what they will. But he that is their master shall yet prevail, and he will deliver you from this phantom, and his name is Melkor, Lord of all, giver of freedom, and he shall make you stronger than they.
Then Ar-Pharazôn the king turned back to the worship of the dark, and of Melkor the lord thereof. At first in secret, but ere long openly, and in the face of his people, and they for the most part followed him. Yet there dwelt still a remnant of the faithful, as has been told, at Romena, and in the country near, and other few there were, here and there in the land. The chief among them, to whom they looked for leading and courage in evil days, was Amandil, counselor of the king, and his son Elendil, whose sons were Isildur and Anarion, then young men by the reckoning of Numenor. Amandil and Elendil were great ship captains, and they were of the line of Elros Tar Miniatur, though not of the ruling house to whom belonged the crown and the throne of the city of Armenelos. So they are direct descendants of Elros, but because of the way that the kingship fell, when you have multiple brothers and it just falls to the one, right? They are direct descendants of Elros, but they are not in line for the kingship, not directly. Because of probably, a younger sibling somewhere along that line skewing them off. In the days of their youth together, Amandil had been dear to Pharazôn, and though he was of the elf friends, he remained in his council until the coming of Sauron. Now he was dismissed, for Sauron hated him above all others in Numenor. But he was so noble, and had been so mighty a captain of the sea, that he was still held in honor by many of the people, and neither the king nor Sauron dared to lay hands on him as yet. Therefore Amandil withdrew to Romena, and all that he trusted still to be faithful he summoned to come thither in secret, for he feared that evil would now grow apace, and all the elf friends were in peril. And so it soon came to pass, for the Meneltarma was utterly deserted in those days, and though not even Sauron dared to defile the high place, yet the king would let no man, upon pain of death, ascend to it, not even those of the faithful who kept Ilúvatar in their hearts. And Sauron urged the king to cut down the white tree, Niml the Fair, that grew in his courts, for it was a memorial to the Eldar and of the light of Valinor. At the first the king would not assent to this, since he believed that the fortunes of his house were bound up with the tree, as was forspoken by Tar Palantir. Thus in his folly, he who now hated the Eldar and the Valar vainly clung to the shadow of the old alliance of Numenor. Oh, the old allegiance of Numenor, my bad. But when Amandil heard rumor of the evil purpose of Sauron, he was grieved to the heart, knowing that in the end Sauron would surely have his will. Then he spoke to Elendil and the sons of Elendil, recalling the tale of the trees of Valinor, and Isildur said no word, but went out by night and did a deed for which he was afterwards renowned. For he passed alone in disguise to Armenelos and to the courts of the king, which were now forbidden to the faithful. And he came to the place of the tree, which was forbidden to all by the orders of Sauron, and the tree was watched day and night by guards in his service. At that time Nimloth was dark, and bore no bloom, for it was late in the autumn, and its winter was nigh. And Isildur passed through the guards, and took from the tree a fruit that hung upon it, and turned to go. But the guard was aroused, and he was assailed, and fought his way out, receiving many wounds. And he escaped, and because he was disguised, it was not discovered who had laid hands on the tree. But Isildur came at last hardly back to Romena, and delivered the fruit to the hands of Amandil, ere his strength failed him. So he has given the fruit of Nimloth to Amandil. Then the fruit was planted in secret, and it was blessed by Amandil, and a shoot arose from it and sprouted in the spring. But when its first leaf opened, then Isildur, who had lain long and come near to death, arose and was troubled no more by his wounds. So that's kind of cool. Snow Warning, thank you for all these comments. I appreciate them. If I remember correctly, Amandil is descended from the oldest daughter of a king, Silmarillion. But back then, the kingship still had a male-only inheritance. Correct. So Amandil is technically of the older line. Yeah. I forgot about that note about Silmarillion. They did mention that earlier. Thank you for pointing that out. So yes. That's when they had no girls allowed. Which is dumb. And even when girls do take power, they end up marrying someone who wrests power from them because I'm a man. I'm a man, I'm a king now. So I'm gonna do king things and not let you actually rule. Boo. But very cool that when the first leaf of this shoot from the fruit of Nimloth, when the first leaf opens, Isildur, who'd been close to death at that point, is finally, he's troubled no more by his wounds. Oh yeah, how names reflect fates happens a lot with Tolkien. He really does a good job of naming his characters descriptively. If you happen to know Elvish. Which is sort of the kicker, right? But that's why I'm here. I'm here to help. Oh, and also have allergies today. My word, it's so bad today. It's not typical for me. Alright, so he's troubled no more by his wounds. Yay! None too soon was this done, for after the assault, the king yielded to Sauron and felled the White Tree, and turned then wholly away from the allegiance of his fathers. But Sauron caused to be built upon the hill, in the midst of the city of the Numenorians, Armenelos the Golden, a mighty temple. Oh dear. And it was in the form of a circle that had... and it was in the form of a circle at the base, and there the walls were 50 feet in thickness, and the width of the base was 500 feet across the center. And the walls arose from the ground 500 feet, and they were crowned with a mighty dome. And that dome was roofed all with silver, and rose glittering in the sun, so that the light of it could be seen afar off. But soon the light was darkened, and the silver became black. For there was an altar of fire in the midst of the temple, and in the topmost of the dome there was a lover, whence there issued a great smoke. And the first fire upon the altar, and the first fire upon the altar Sauron kindled with the hewn wood of Nimloth, and it crackled and was consumed. But men marveled that at the reek that went up from it, so that the land lay under a cloud for 7 days, until slowly it passed into the west. What a visual. That the silver roof of this great dome gets tarnished by the smoke. And the first fire to be kindled is done with the wood of the tree that was cut down. Like, damn, Sauron! Like, you didn't have to go that hard, but you totally did. Because from his point of view and these lies that he's spinning, he's just like, this tree represents everything that you hate. This tree represents the deception of the Valar and their puppet, Eru. This tree represents all those bad things, and we're going to burn it, and the smoke is gonna go west, and they're gonna know that you don't believe their lies anymore. Like, oh my god. Like, Sauron commits, okay? Like, this is not his first rodeo. He committed to his Anatar persona, and he is totally committing to the role of, like, Grand Vizier. He's very Jafar here. Giving dark counsel to the king. Like, oh my god, so brilliant. So brilliant. Thereafter the fire and smoke went up without ceasing, for the power of Sauron daily increased, and in that temple, with spilling of blood and torment and great wickedness, men made sacrifice to Melkor, that he should release them from death. and most often from among the faithful they chose their victims, yet never openly on the charge that they would not worship Melkor, the giver of freedom. Rather was cause sought against them that they hated the king and were his rebels, or that they plotted against their kin, devising lies and poison. These charges were for the most part false, yet those were bitter days, and hate brings forth hate. But for all this, death did not depart from the land. Rather, it came sooner and more often, and in many dreadful guises. For whereas aforetime men had grown slowly old, and had laid them down in the end to sleep, they were weary at last of the world. Now madness. Oh, sorry. Let's try that sentence again. For whereas aforetime men had grown slowly old, and had laid them down in the end to sleep when they were weary at last of the world, now madness and sickness assailed them. And yet they were afraid to die and go out into the dark, the realm of the Lord that they had taken. And they cursed themselves in their agony. And men took weapons in those days and slew one another for little cause, for they were become quick to anger, and Sauron, or those whom he had bound to himself, went about the land setting man against man, so that the people murmured against the king and the lords, or against any that had aught that they had not. And the men of power took cruel revenge. So Sauron is sending out his feelers and being like, well, now we've got this haves and have-nots situation, and I'm going to make them both hate each other. And he does, because he's really good at this. Nonetheless, for long it seemed to the Numenorians that they prospered, and if they were not increased in happiness, yet they grew more strong, and their rich men ever richer. For with the aid and counsel of Sauron they multiplied their possessions, and they devised engines, and they built ever greater ships, and they sailed now with power and armory to Middle-earth, and they came no longer as bringers of gifts, nor even as rulers, but as fierce men of war. And they hunted the men of Middle-earth, and took their goods and enslaved them, and many they slew cruelly upon their altars. For they built in their fortresses temples and great tombs in those days, and men feared them. And the memory of the kindly kings of the ancient days faded from the world, and was darkened by many a tale of dread. Thus Ar-Pharazôn, king of the land of the star, grew to the mightiest tyrant that had yet been in the world since the reign of Morgoth, though in truth Sauron ruled all from behind the throne. But the years passed, and the king felt the shadow of death approach as his days lengthened, and he was filled with fear and wrath. Now came the hour that Sauron had prepared and long had awaited, and Sauron spoke to the king, saying that his strength was now so great that he might think to have his will in all things, and the subject to no command or ban. And he said,
The Valar have possessed themselves of the land where there is no death, and they lie to you concerning it, hiding it as best they may, because of their avarice, and their fear lest the kings of men should wrest from them the deathless realm, and rule the world in their stead. And though, doubtless, the gift of life unending is not for all, but only for such as are worthy, being men of might and pride and great lineage, yet against all justice it is done, that this gift, which is his due, should be withheld from the King of Kings, Ar-Pharazôn, mightiest of the sons of earth, to whom Manwë alone can be compared, even he. But great kings do not brook denials, and take what is their due.
Then Ar-Pharazôn, being besotted, and walking under the shadow of death, for his span was drawing towards its end, hearkened to Sauron. and he began to ponder in his heart how he might make war upon the Valar. Wish it's about to go down. It's going down for real. He was long preparing this design, and he spoke not openly of it, yet it could not be hidden from all. And Amandil, becoming aware of the purposes of the king, was dismayed and filled with a great dread, for he knew that men could not vanquish the Valar in war, and that ruin must come upon the world if this war were not stayed. Therefore he called his son Erendil, and he said to him,
"The days are dark, and there is no hope for men, for the faithful are few. Therefore I am minded to try that counsel which our forefather Erendil took of old, to sail into the west, be there ban or no, and speak to the Valar, even to Manwë himself if may be, and beseech his aid ere all is lost."
"Would you then betray the king?" said Erendil. "For you know well the charge that they make against us, that we are traitors and spies, and that until this day has been false."
"If I thought that Manwë needed such a messenger,"
said Amandil,
"I would betray the king. For there is but one loyalty from which no man can be absolved in heart for any cause, but it is for mercy upon men and their deliverance from Sauron the Deceiver that I would plead, since some at least have remained faithful. And as for the ban, I will suffer in myself the penalty, lest all my people should become guilty."
But what think you, my father, is like to befall those of your house whom you leave behind when your deed becomes known?"
"It must not become known,"
said Amandil.
"I will prepare my going in secret, and I will set sail into the east, whither daily the ships depart from our havens, and thereafter, as wind and chance may allow, I will go about, though south or north, back into the west, and seek what I may find. But for you and your folk, my son, I counsel that you should prepare yourselves other ships, and put aboard all such things as your hearts cannot bear to part with. And when the ships are ready, you should lie in the haven of Romena, and give out among men that you purpose, when you see your time, to follow me into the east. Amandil is no longer so dear to your kinsman upon the throne that he will grieve overmuch, if we seek to depart for any reason or for good. But let it not be seen that you intend to take many men, for he will be troubled, because of the war that he now plots, for which he will need all the force that he may gather. Seek out the faithful that are known still to be true, and let them join you in secret if they are willing to go with you and share in your design."
"And what shall that design be?" said Erendil.
"To meddle not in war, and to watch,"
answered Amandil.
"Until I return I can say no more, but it is most like that you shall fly from the land of the star with no star to guide you, for that land is defiled. Then you shall lose all that you have loved, for tasting death in life, seeking a land of exile elsewhere, but east or west the Valar alone can say."
Then Amandil said farewell to all his household, as one that is about to die.
"For,"
said he,
"it may well prove that you will see me never again, and that I shall show you no such sign as Erendil showed long ago, but hold you ever in readiness, for the end of the world that we have known is now at hand.
It is said that Amandil set sail in a small ship at night, and steered first eastward, and then went about and passed into the west. And he took with him 3 servants dear to his heart, and never again were they heard of by word or sign in this world. Nor is there any tale or guess of their fate. Men could not a second time be saved by any such embassy, and for the treason of Numenor there was no easy absolving. But Erendil did all that his father had bidden, and his ships lay off the east coast of the land, and the faithful put aboard their wives and their children and their heirlooms and great store of goods. Many things there were of beauty and power, such as the Numenorians had contrived in the days of their wisdom, vessels and jewels, and scrolls of lore written in scarlet and black. And 7 stones they had, the gift of the Eldar, but in the ship of Isildur was guarded the young tree, the scion of Nimloth the Fair. Thus Erendil held himself in readiness, and did not meddle in the evil deeds of those days, and ever he looked for a sign that did not come. Then he journeyed in secret to the western shores, and gazed out over the sea, for sorrow and yearning were upon him, and he greatly loved his father, but naught could he descry save the fleets of Ar-Pharazôn gathering in the havens of the west. Now aforetime in the Isle of Numenor the weather was ever apt to the needs and liking of men, rain in due season and ever in measure, and sunshine now warmer, now cooler, and winds from the sea. And when the wind was in the west, it seemed to many that it was filled with a fragrance, fleeting but sweet, heart-stirring, as of flowers that bloom forever in undying meads that have no names on mortal shores. But all this was now changed, for the sky itself was darkened, and there were storms of rain and hail in those days, and violent winds, and ever and anon a great ship of the Numenorians would founder and return not to haven, though such a grief had not till then befallen them since the rising of the star being Erendil. And out of the west there would come at times a great cloud in the evening, shaped as it were an eagle, with pinions spread to the north and the south. And slowly it would loom up, blotting out the sunset, and then uttermost night would fall upon Numenor. And some of the eagles bore lightning beneath their wings, and thunder echoed between sea and cloud. Then men grew afraid.
"Behold, the eagles of the lords of the west!"
They cried.
"The eagles of Manwë are come upon Numenor."
And they fell upon their faces. Then some few would repent for a season, but others hardened their hearts, and they shook their fists at heaven, saying, "The lords of the west have plotted against us. They strike first. The next blow shall be ours." These words the king himself spoke, but they were devised by Sauron. Now the lightnings increased and slew men upon the hills, and in the fields and in the streets of the city, and a fiery bolt smote the dome of the temple and shore it asunder, and it was wreathed in flame. But the temple itself was unshaken, and Sauron stood there upon the pentacle and defied upon the pinnacle and defied the lightning and was unharmed. And in that hour men called him a god and did all that he would. When therefore the last portent came, they heeded it little, for the land shook under them, and a groaning as of thunder underground was mingled with the roaring of the sea, and smoke issued from the peak of the Meneltarma. But all the more did Ar-Pharazôn press on with his armament. I'm going to pause for a moment because we have a really cool illustration that I really want to share. Make sure I didn't skip any others. I did not. Okay. So, really, this is such a cool illustration. I love this one. Alright. Look at it! It's so cool. I love this picture. This one is really cool. So you might not see it at first, but there's an eagle. It's a storm eagle. Like, fuck yeah. Manway's kind of cool. I gotta say. You know what's particularly ironic about this, though? Storms were not created by Manwë. Storms were created by Melkor. Melkor is the one who first conceived of rain and lightning and snow. These were all Melkor's creations. The other Valar were like, dude is brilliant. Like, Morgoth, dude, like, you create the coolest stuff. Because he had a hand in all of the powers, Morgoth had the ability to share in all these things. And so he took air and water and he made storms out of them. It's so cool. And here's Manwë using that as, like, a tactic. And Sauron's there like, I defy you. Like, come and fucking get me. But he's not struck down. Probably partially because, I mean, Manwë knows better. Like, he could strike down Sauron, but it wouldn't destroy him. He knows that. So he probably was thinking, what's the point? But also, like, these are primal forces of nature that Melkor himself had a hand in creating. So, could they be used against Sauron? Question mark? Do I have another platform? I'm on practically all of them. They're all in the link tree in my bio. So if you're still there, Alley Cat, you can find me at the link in my bio. I stream primarily on YouTube. So if you're gonna choose a platform, YouTube is the best. That's the most helpful. Thank you. But, like, could these storms even actually take Sauron down? Not because he's powerful, but because he's akin to the magic that created these storms. I want to know. Oh, man. It's such a cool visual, though. That storm coming out of the west. And you see the men just sort of, like, freaking out and prostrating themselves. And fleeing. Because that's definitely foreboding, shall we say. It's a pretty foreboding sign there. Oh, what a cool picture, though. I love that illustration. All illustrations in this book are by Ted Nasmith. Just putting that out there yet again. Okay. So, shit's about to get real. So, our Pharazôn, he ain't bothered. He not even bothered though. So he continues, he presses on with his armament. It's not the right move. In that time, the fleets of the Numenorians darkened the sea upon the west of the land, and they were like an archipelago of 1,000 isles. Their masts were as a forest upon the mountains, and their sails like a brooding cloud. And their banners were golden and black, and all things waited upon the word of Ar-Pharazôn, and Sauron withdrew into the innermost circle of the temple, and men brought him victims to be burned. Then the eagles of the Lords of the West came up out of the dayfall, and they were arrayed as for battle, advancing in a line diminished beyond sight. And as they came, their wings spread ever wider, grasping the sky. But the west burned red behind them, and they glowed beneath, as though they were lit with a flame of great anger, so that all Numenor was illuminated as with a smoldering fire. And men looked upon the faces of their fellows, and it seemed to them that they were red with wrath. Then Ar-Pharazôn hardened his heart, and he went aboard. Let's try that again. Then Ar-Pharazôn hardened his heart, and he went aboard his mighty ship, Alcorondas, Castle of the Sea. Many-oared it was, and many-masted, golden and sable. And upon it the throne of Ar-Pharazôn was set. Then he did on his panoply? Panoply. I'm not familiar with that word, actually. Then he did on his panoply and his crown, and let raise his standard, and he gave the signal for the raising of the anchors, and in that hour the trumpets of Numenor outrang the thunder. Thus the fleets of the Númenóreans moved against the menace of the west. And there was little wind, but they had many oars and many strong slaves to row beneath the lash. The sun went down, and there came a great silence. Darkness fell upon the land, and the sea was still, while the world waited for what should betide. Slowly the fleets passed out of sight of the watchers in the havens, and their lights faded, and night took them. And in the morning they were gone, for a wind arose in the east, and it wafted them away, and they broke the ban of the Valar, and sailed into forbidden seas, going up with war against the deathless, to wrest from them everlasting life within the circles of the world. Yeah, how's that gonna turn out? It's not gonna turn out good. So we're at another pause here. But we're getting close to the end. Getting close. Just a few more pages. We're gonna make it. We're making really good time for only being 2.5 hours in. But the fleets of Ar-Pharazôn came up out of the deeps of the sea and encompassed Avallone and all the isle of Eressëa, and the Eldar mourned, for the light of the setting sun was cut off by the cloud of the Númenóreans. And at last Ar-Pharazôn came even to Aman, the blessed realm, and the coasts of Valinor, and still all was silent, and doom hung by a thread. For Ar-Pharazôn wavered at the end, and almost turned back. His heart misgave him when he looked upon the soundless shores, and saw Taniquetil shining, whiter than snow, colder than death, silent, immutable, terrible as the shadow of the light of Ilúvatar. But pride was now his master, and at last he left his ship and strode upon the shore, claiming the land for his own, if none should do battle for it. And a host of the Númenóreans encamped in might about Tuna, whence all the Eldar had fled. Then Manwë upon the mountain called upon Ilúvatar, and for that time the Valar laid down their government of Arda. But Ilúvatar showed forth his power, and he changed the fashion of the world, and a great chasm opened in the sea between Numenor and the deathless lands, and the waters flowed down into it, and the noise and smoke of the cataracts went up to heaven, and the world was shaken. And all the fleets of the Númenóreans were drawn down into the abyss, and they were drowned and swallowed up forever. But Ar-Pharazôn the king and the mortal warriors that had set foot upon the land of Aman were buried under falling hills. There, it is said, that they lie imprisoned in the caves of the Forgotten until the last battle and the day of doom. But the land of Aman and Eressëa of the Eldar were taken away and removed beyond the reach of men forever. And Andor, the land of gift, Numenor of the kings, Elena of the star of Erendil was utterly destroyed. For it was nigh to the east of the great rift, and its foundations were overturned, and it fell and went down into darkness, and was no more. And there is not now upon earth any place abiding where the memory of a time without evil is preserved. For Ilúvatar cast back the great seas west of Middle-earth, and empty lands east of it, and new lands and new seas were made, and the world was diminished, for Valinor and Eressëa were taken from it into the realm of hidden things. In an hour unlooked for by men this doom befell, on the 39th day since the passing of the fleets. Then suddenly fire burst from Meneltarma, and there came a mighty wind and a tumult of the earth, and the sky reeled, and the hills slid, and Numenor went down into the sea with all its children and its wives and its maidens and its ladies proud, and all its gardens and its halls and its towers, its tombs and its riches, and its jewels and its webs, and its things painted and carven, and its laughter and its mirth and its music, its wisdom and its lore, they vanished forever. And last of all the mounting wave, green and cold and plumed with foam, climbing over the land, took to its bosom Tar Miriel, the queen, fairer than silver or ivory or pearls. Too late she strove to ascend the steep ways of the Meneltarma to the holy place, for the waters overtook her, and her cry was lost in the roaring of the wind. Nice, Dennis. But whether or no it were that Amandil came indeed to Valinor, and Manwë hearkened to his prayer, by grace of the Valar Elendil and his sons, and their people were spared from the ruin of that day. For Elendil had remained in Romena, refusing the summons of the king when he set forth to war, and avoiding the soldiers of Sauron that came to seize him and drag him to the fires of the temple, he went aboard his ship and stood off from the shore, waiting on the time. There he was protected by the land from the great draught of the sea that drew all towards the abyss, and afterwards he was sheltered from the first fury of the storm. But when the devouring wave rolled over the land and Numenor toppled to its fall, then he would have been overwhelmed and would have deemed it the lesser grief to perish, for no wrench of death could be more bitter than the loss and agony of that day. But the great wind took him, wilder than any wind that men had known, roaring from the west, and it swept his ships far away, and it rent their sails and snapped their masts, hunting the unhappy men like straws upon the water. What a visual. So these gigantic masts of these great ships are just being ripped off of the ships, and they are now like perilous debris in the water, like skewering people. Nine ships there were, 4 for Elendil, and for Isildur 3, and for Anarion 2, and they were fled before the black gale, out of the twilight of doom in the darkness of the world. And the deeps rose beneath them in towering anger, and waves like unto mountains, moving with great caps of writhen snow, bore them up amid the wreckage of the clouds, and after many days cast them away upon the shores of Middle-earth. And all the coasts and seaward regions of the western world suffered great change and ruin in that time. For the seas invaded the lands, and shores foundered, and ancient isles were drowned, and new isles were uplifted, and hills crumbled, and rivers were turned into strange courses. And we do have another illustration to show, so let's switch it up. So I assume that this is the Great Wave starting to overtake the island of Numenor. And this female figure here is probably Tarmiria. So that's the queen, as she was trying to ascend up to the holy place at the top of the isle. Not that it would have done her any good, but she gets overtaken by the waves as the island falls into the abyss. Oh dear. Yes, this is the Akalabath. We're almost finished with the Akalabath. Yeah, the elven names and places make this really hard to read. Tolkien does not pull punches when it comes to naming people and places, and many characters have multiple names, which makes it even harder to remember. Yeah, when Numenor becomes Akallabêth or Atalante. That's why we say it's such a parallel to the Tale of Atlantis. Because he even names it Atalante, which actually has a meaning in Elvish. Tolkien is brilliant. Okay, let's see. Actually, I think I'm going to show this other illustration as well before we move on. This is a classic Ted Nasmith piece. And I only apologize that my camera's so crappy because, like, the colors are so vibrant. Like, this is a really bright red. Like a cherry red. Well, not cherry red, but like a bright fire red. There's a wonderful contrast between the red on the sails and the blue of the ocean. It's a really pretty piece. So this is Numenor on freaking fire. This world is on fire. This world is on fire. I mean, it really was. So those are the ships of Elendil leaving right before shit really hits the fan. So let's go back to Elendil and finish off the chapter, shall we? All right. We're close, guys. It's like 2 more pages. Elendil and his sons after founded kingdoms in Middle-earth, and though their lore and craft was but an echo of that which had been ere Sauron came to Numenor, yet very great it seemed to the wild men of the world. And much is said in other lore of the deeds of the heirs of Elendil in that age that came after, and of their strife with Sauron that not yet was ended. For Sauron himself was filled with great fear at the wrath of the Valar, and the doom that Eru laid upon sea and land. It was greater far than aught he had looked for, hoping only for the death of the Númenóreans and the defeat of their proud king. And Sauron, sitting in his black seat in the midst of the temple, had laughed when he heard the trumpets of Ar-Pharazôn sounding for battle. And again he had laughed when he heard the thunder of the storm, and a third time, even as he laughed at his own thought, thinking what he would do now in the world, being rid of the Edain forever. He was taken in the midst of his mirth, and his seat and his temple fell into the abyss. But Sauron was not of mortal flesh, and though he was robbed now of that shape in which he had wrought so great an evil, so that he could never again appear fair to the eyes of men, yet his spirit arose out of the deep and passed as a shadow and a black wind over the sea, and came back to Middle-earth and to Mordor, that was his home. There he took up again his great ring in Barad-dûr, and dwelt there and dwelt there dark and silent, until he wrought himself a new guise, an image of malice and hatred made visible, and the eye of Sauron the Terrible few could endure. But these things come not into the tale of the drowning of Numenor, which now all is told. And even the name of that land perished, and men spoke thereafter not of Elena, nor of Andor, the gift that was taken away, nor of Numenore, on the confines of the world. But the exiles on the shores of the sea, if they turned towards the west in the desire of their hearts, spoke of Mar Nufalmar, that was overwhelmed in the waves, Akallabêth, the downfallen, Atalante, in the Eldarin tongue. Among the exiles, many believed that the summit of the Meneltarma, the pillar of heaven, was not drowned forever, but rose again above the waves, a lonely island lost in the great waters, for it had been a hallowed place, and even in the days of Sauron none had defiled it. And some there were in the seed of Erendil that afterwards sought for it, because it was said among lore-masters that the far-sighted men of old could see from the Meneltarma a glimmer of the deathless land. For even after the ruin, the hearts of the Dunadine were still set westwards. Losing my tongue. For even after the ruin, the hearts of the Dunadine were still set westwards, and though they knew indeed that the world was changed, they said,
Avalone is vanished from the earth, and the land of Aman is taken away, and in the world of this present darkness they cannot be found. Yet once they were, and therefore they still are, in true being and in the whole shape of the world, as at first it was devised.
For the Dunadine held that even mortal men, if so blessed, might look upon other times than those of their body's life. Other times than those of their body's life, sorry. I was confused there. And they longed ever to escape from the shadows of their exile, and to see in some fashion the light that dies not. For the sorrow of the thought of death had pursued them over the deeps of the sea. Thus it was that great mariners among them would still search the empty seas, hoping to come upon the isle of Meneltarma, and there to see a vision of things that were. But they found it not, and those that sailed far, oh my gosh, I'm losing my place. The text went from large to small, and I'm struggling now. Let's try this again. Okay, for the sorrow of the thought of death had pursued them over the deeps of the sea. Thus it was that great mariners among them would still search the empty seas, hoping to come upon the isle of Meneltarma, and there to see a vision of things that were. But they found it not, and those that sailed far came only to the new lands, and found them like to the old lands, and subject to death. And those that sailed furthest set but a girdle about the earth, and returned weary at last to the place of their beginning. And they said,
All roads are now bent.
Thus in after days, what by the voyages of ships, what by lore and starcraft the kings of men knew that the world was indeed made round, and yet the Eldar were permitted still to depart and to come to the ancient west and to Avalone if they would. Therefore the lore masters of men said that a straight road must still be for those that were permitted to find it, and they taught that while the new world fell away, the old road and the path of the memory of the West still went on, as it were a mighty bridge, invisible, that passed through the air of breath and of flight, which were bent now as the world was bent, and traversed Ilmen, which flesh unaided cannot endure, until it came to Tol Eressëa, the lonely isle, and maybe even beyond to Valinor, where the Valar still dwell and watch the unfolding of the story of the world. And tales and rumors arose along the shores of the sea concerning mariners and men forlorn upon the water, who, by some fate or grace or valor or favor of the Valar, had entered in upon the straight way and seen the face of the world sink below them, and so had come to the lamplit quays of Avallone, or verily to the last beaches on the margin of Aman, and there had looked upon the white mountain, dreadful and beautiful, before they died. Thus ends the Akallabêth. Thus ends the Akallabêth. So, as you can see, we're getting pretty close to the end here. This is significant. So there's only one more bit in the Silmarillion to cover, and that will be next weekend, and that'll be our final Silm stream. But the last bit is of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. So that will talk a little bit more about Sauron, likely cover Celebrimbor, the creation of the Rings of Power. Again, really good information for the Rings of Power TV show. So this is all stuff you really want to know. So the Akallabêth is really important because this is all Second Age Middle-earth. And the Rings of Power and the Third Age stuff is also going to be really important because the first bit of that is also in the Second Age. And we don't know quite how they are planning to reshape the story. So we know that they are taking all of the events. Now, currently they only have the rights to the appendices in The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Those two things have been acquired by Amazon, so they have the right to pull information from those, but they do not have the rights to the Silmarillion, which means all the stuff we just read, it informs our knowledge of the Second Age, but they don't have access to all of these details, which is a damn shame. But I completely understand the Tolkien estate not wanting to give up rights to anything within the Silmarillion. This is the proverbial Bible of Tolkien fans. It's that season too. I mean, like we're in the middle of 3 holy holidays, which is really kind of cool that they all converge at the same time this year. But we have Easter / Ostara. We have Passover for those who are Jewish, and then I know there's a holiday in Islam as well. I'm blanking on the name of it. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna kick myself for not knowing it off the top of my head, but let me look it up. I'm like, I want to be accurate. Ramadan. It's Ramadan. Oh my word. Okay. I'm like, I know it's not Rosh Hashanah. I knew it wasn't that one, so Ramadan. Apologies for anyone who is a Muslim in my stream. Couldn't remember it off the top of my head, but I at least knew it was happening. Ramadan, thank you. So, yes. Really cool that we happen to have all 3 of those happening at the same time. So instead of reading those holy books, because I am none of those 3 religions, I'll read this instead. This is practically my Bible. I don't feel that it's sacrilegious to say that. I don't believe that Tolkien is a religion, but I have a lot of fun with it. I'm just not particularly religious. I have too many religious scars, so I'll deal with that on my own time. I think ideologically I'm closer to Buddhist than anything. That's according to my sister-in-law, who is an ordained interfaith minister. So she did seminary and learned about all different kinds of religions so that she can be an interfaith minister. And so according to her, my ideology is much closer aligned to Buddhism. So that's kind of cool to know about me, I guess. Hey, new beta, welcome! Yeah, great read. Oh man. And honestly, I can't remember the last time I read the Akalabath. I know I read the Silm once, cover to cover, back in the day. Like, not quite 20 years ago, but probably like 18 years ago. I read it in early college, and managed to go cover to cover. But since then, I don't think, like, I've referenced the Akalabath from time to time, but I've not read it all the way through since. So, this is really fun for me. I'm so excited. So next week, the final bit of the... Pardon me, gosh. Next week, the final bit of the Silmarillion will get read, and that is Of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. A little bit shorter than today's, so it won't be quite as long of a stream, but really looking forward to that, and that will end our Silmarillion streams. I have been keeping up with them now, getting them all up into a single playlist on my YouTube channel, so if you've missed any of the streams, I even went back and re-recorded one of the streams that I lost the footage to. So it is all on my YouTube channel. I have a playlist set up for all parts, and I have been making it so that once I finish the actual reading of the chapter, if you want to skip some of the conversation, especially because I really do meander on some of these streams. If you want to skip all of that, a card pops up and it just says skip to part whatever the next part is. So you can click on that and it will take you immediately to the next stream. Eventually, I am going to edit all of these so that all the extraneous BS is out of them. And when I do that, I will make a condensed version, and I'll post that up, probably to the same playlist. So if you want to do the condensed version of the Silmarillion, where it's just the reading and just the important commentary, I will make that available eventually. Give me your patience on that. Absolutely, new beta. It's such important lore. I mean, this is pretty epic lore, and we do get a lot of names tossed at us, but the important thing is to remember where this fits into the overarching narrative of Middle-earth, because most of the Akalabath happens not on Middle-earth. It happens in Numenor. But you gotta think, all of this growing and flourishing of Numenor is happening at the same time that realms are being built in Middle-earth after the, destruction of the First Age. We have, Eregion being settled by the Noldor. So we have Celebrimbor making Austin Edil, which is where he and the Gwaithemyrdain start doing all of their great crafts, and they make the Rings of Power. Like, all of this stuff is happening at the same time. Oropher and Thranduil leave the Grey Havens with a huge host of the Sindar elves, and they pass over the Misty Mountains into Greenwood. That happens, my best guesstimate is around the year 1000 of the Second Age. So that happens relatively early. So they leave and they find their own realm. Celeborn and Galadriel settle in Lothlorien with their contingent of Sindar and probably some of the Noldorin elves. They, colonize the Sylvan elves and establish Lothlorien around 1350, if I remember correctly, of the Second Age. So that's slightly after Oropher and Thranduil leave. The only reason I remember that is because I recently reposted a video about the timeline of Thranduil. And there's a note in the Unfinished Tales how Oropher's annoyed. He's annoyed by Celeborn and Galadriel settling in Lorien, because basically they just copied him, but they do it worse. So when Orfer and Thranduil pass over the Misty Mountains and encounter the Sylvan Elves, they basically try to give up their own culture. They want to become Sylvan Elves. They are saying, peace! They don't want any of the drama that the Noldor bring with them wherever they fucking go. They don't want any of the drama. They want to completely separate and isolate themselves from the other elves of Middle-earth at that point. At least the other elves from Beleriand, surviving elves. And they just decide, we're going to become Sylvan Elves. So they go into Greenwood with a completely different mindset compared to Celeborn and Galadriel, who go in fully acknowledging that they are Noldorin and Sindarin elves, and they just full-on colonize the Sylvan Elves in Lothlorien. But because of the imperialistic feel of Tolkien's fiction, these Sylvan Elves are subjugated, but they are glad for it. Like there's no struggle? Like, they just see the Noldor and Sindar and they don't try to cling to any of their own traditions. They're like, yeah, that's better, we're cool with that. And it's like, it doesn't sit quite well. But there's a little bit of struggle with Nimrodel and that story as well. But really, Galadriel and Celeborn, their influence in Lorien has a completely different mouth taste to Thranduil and Orfer up in Greenwood. So the Sylvan Elves of Greenwood are considered more wild and primitive, which is some colonist bullshit, but oh, thank you so much, Tama. Tamashisaka. Thank you. Arigatou gozaimasu. But yeah, so that is some colonizer bullshit right there. But the Wood Elves do their own thing, and for the most part, they keep apart. They don't want anything to do with all the drama until they feel that it really directly affects them, and so they do join the Battle of the Last Alliance. Orfer perishes because he makes a really bad decision. He charges before he's been given the order, so he jumps the gun and gets 2/3 of his own forces slaughtered. It's not a good look, Orfer, but he was always really tempestuous, that one. Very much, you can't tell me what to do. He doesn't play well with others. Orfer never played well with others. Thranduil, when pushed, would absolutely work with other people, with other realms and races, if he had to. Much like, Battle of Five Armies. He's not getting along with the dwarves there at all. But ultimately, they're like, okay, well, we gotta take out the wargs and the orcs. Those are kind of a big problem for all of us, so let's work together against these guys, and then we can fight each other. So priorities, Thranduil. Hey, we got 100 messages this stream. Score! It's only because it's a longer than normal stream, but thanks, guys! Thanks for the interaction. You don't see anything wrong with the Sylvan Elves being ruled by the Sindar? There's no hint of discontent with it. It bothers me because there's no hint of discontent with it. Because it plays into that narrative hierarchy that Tolkien establishes, and I understand it's his fantasy world, it's his circus, his monkeys, right? But it's not realistic. It's not realistic. These elves have been doing perfectly fine with their own customs and their own lore and their own stories to tell, and Tolkien just sort of bulldozes them. And so it's one of those cases where I know what Tolkien writes, and what Tolkien writes is that the Sylvan give up their language and they give up their culture and they become more like the Sindar in general. And it doesn't sit right with me. It never has. It doesn't sit right. Oh, honor the Vala of Water, hydrate. Thank you, Stream Elements. So yeah, I'm a bit bothered. Bit bothered. Yeah, rules. Elves are ruled or unruled in a different way to us. They have an elegant hierarchy. That's a fair opinion. It is elegant the way that Tolkien put it into play. I just disagree on the presumption that those who aren't exposed to the divine inherently have less worth and less to contribute. I think that Sylvan elves and the Avari and all of these elves that just refuse the summons of the Valar, as they have the right to, they get crapped on an awful lot in the lore, and they're just automatically seen as lesser because they haven't learned all of the things that the Valar could teach. But in their own way, they've had to find their own path and build their own society, and that's not something to be looked down upon, in my opinion. So it's just the hierarchy itself is elegant, like, I agree, but the way that it's implemented with there being no strife against it seems unrealistic to me. But again, you know, I am coming from a human perspective, right? So I'm just like, I'm like, but indigenous culture, and this doesn't make me feel good. Right. See, that's how I feel. It gives me a little bit too much of the quote-unquote white man's burden vibe to be completely comfortable with it. It's our duty as the enlightened to educate our little brown brothers, right? Like, it has that vibe to it, and I hate that. It happens with the Numenorians too, but at least with the Numenorians, it's painted in a negative light. For the most part. Like, we do have the Numenorians before they go dark, and they go into cultures and they share their knowledge, but with no desire to rule. It's not a transactional relationship. They share their knowledge and, you know, try to enlighten the people around them, but there's no expectation of them changing their culture. It's very much, here's the knowledge that we can share, do with it what you will. They let them still be, you know, the determiners of their own fate. So there's a different vibe with, like, the early Numenorians versus the later Numenorians, where they go and they basically enslave everyone. They're like, we're taking all your riches. We're gonna establish our own realms and you guys can, you know, get fucked. Like, it's a completely different vibe. Completely different vibe. And then, you know, we have actual slavery. Like, it is mentioned in the Akalabath that when the Numenorians go dark because of the influence of Sauron, they take slaves. They take slaves from Umbar. And, you know, so the darker-skinned folk in Tolkien's world get enslaved too. And that's fucked up. And they die in the white man's war. Like, I mean, like, it's... Like, and I know he did that purposefully. Because Tolkien grew up during apartheid. Like, he didn't fuck around with it. So... yeah, there are certain parallels there that I know were put in place on purpose. The injustice of, you know, these people who were subjugated, forced to be the oar rowers in these gigantic ships. They don't have a choice whether they're going to Valinor or not. They're probably like, we'd kind of like to just go home. Can you please just take us back to Umbar and leave us the fuck alone? But they take slaves and they make the slaves do stuff and probably sacrificed a bunch of them to Melkor, the worship of Melkor. Like, the Numenorians go dark, and when they go dark, they go hard dark. It's not a good look. So there's a lot that happens. There's a lot that happens, and it's disconcerting. So the vibe that we get from the early Numenorians is different from the later Numenorians. So the dark Numenorians do a bad, right? And while the elves don't have dark intentions, intent versus impact, okay? Like, the intention of the Noldorin and Sindarin elves when they go into the Sylvan spaces is just to share knowledge and cohabitate, right? Though with Orifer and Thranduil, it's decidedly less pushy. It's less pushy. They're like, we want to honor your customs. We don't care about what's going on over there anymore. We want to be you guys. Like, they in a certain way willingly give up their own culture, or they plan on it at least. And the Sylvans just sort of incorporate them into their existing structure, rather than it being a complete hostile takeover. Whereas Celeborn and Galadriel, they bring so much with them, ultimately because look at Galadriel. Like, Galadriel's exposure to the divine is more intense than any other elf in existence in Middle-earth at that point, because she's, one of the few Calaquendi left. So not only was she born in the Undying Lands, but she was besties with Melian the entire time she was in Beleriand. So, like, her exposure to the wisdom and power of the Valar and the Ainur in general is off the charts. So she brings a lot more baggage with her. Amdir, I have to review my info with Amdir, to be completely honest. Yeah, Galadriel did a full internship with Melian before going to Lorien. It's true. But she brings a lot of baggage with her, and so there's a lot more for the Sylvan elves to do or not do with what Galadriel can provide them. So it's just a different vibe. Like, because Galadriel brings so much with her, it's hard to just discard it and let the Sylvan handle themselves and decide how much they want to take or leave. And then some elves are obviously of more knowledge as well. Yeah, you have to respect them and learn from them, but it is idealistic that this exchange of knowledge would come with no strings. Galadriel stayed in Middle-earth. She had the option of going back to the Undying Lands. She stayed specifically because she wanted a land of her own to rule. Galadriel's power-hungry. And that's why, she's tempted by the One Ring, because girl wants power. Girl wants a kingdom. She wants to be worshipped and loved. Yeah, week 1, Lembas. No, that's the thing. Okay, so Lembas, let me say something about Lembas. So Lembas is a craft only done by queens. Only done by queens. The art of making Lembas in Middle-earth in the Third Age is only known by 3 people. 3. Tres, okay? It is Galadriel, it is Celebrian, while she's there, which eventually she's not, and then it's Arwen. Those are literally the only people who know how to make lembas, and who are allowed to make lembas. It is a specifically queenly elven skill. It's only the 3 of them. It's that specific line of the Noldor. But no one else is left. That is literally the only line of women who knew how to do lembas. And when Arwen passes, Lembas is gone from Middle-earth forever. It's just another, tiny thing that just disappears. Because Galadriel is the only one who knows how to do it when the Second Age starts. Because she's the only remaining woman of the line of Finwë. Everyone else has been killed. Amdir rules Lorien until he dies in the Last Alliance. And then his son Amroth rules Lorien until he leaves with Nimrodel. Right, it's been a while. It's been a while since I've done Third Age lore. Oddly, I get so caught up in the Silmarillion that just Third Age lore kind of escapes me sometimes. I'm not infallible, y'all. I'm not a scholar. I'm just a big fan. Galadriel's powers are more defense and Gandalf is offense. And that's... This is gonna sound really Avatar Last Airbender, but that's in line with the elemental forces that they are granted through their rings. Force of fire tends to be offensive, right? just like firebending is an offensive magic type in Avatar. Having the Ring of Fire lends itself to offensive magic. And acts of passion in general. Versus Galadriel was given the water ring. Nenya's the water ring, okay? So, like, her power would be more defensive and slower acting. So yeah, that's perfectly in line with the elemental concept that was put into the rings at their conception. That's all on Celebrimbor. That was all him. Gandalf doesn't sing much. Oh, you meant Melian. Melian could definitely be seen as more defensive, though. Because look at the girdle of Melian. Like, her greatest show of power is a spell that keeps things out. It's completely defensive magic. It keeps everyone out except those that Thingol approves of, number one, which is an interesting caveat. And then those who are driven by fate. Fate that is beyond her power. Right, yeah, I get confused. This is why when I make my videos, I tend to review everything prior. Typically I can script a video or just do it from memory. Several things I've done like that, where I know all the terms and it just spews out of me. But there are other times, especially anything that has a timeline in it, where I go through and spout off a bunch of years and ages and all that jazz. Those, I write them down and then I double check them before I film them. Just to try and make sure I catch any really terrible errors, right? Melian, not Galadriel. Oh, okay. Getting all the names mixed up. It's okay, it happens to me too. Totally happens. Especially when we get into using the alternate names for several characters, so yeah, it totally happens. Things are hard to remember. I struggle with the names of the Numenorian kings. Because the ones that aren't in Elvish. Because the Elvish names make perfect sense to me. Most of the time I understand the roots of their names and it doesn't challenge me too badly. But then you get their actual Numenorian names and oof, the Tar whatever. Certain ones stand out, like Tar Minastir, Tar Palantir, and Tar Farazon. And Tar Miniatur. Those ones stick in my mind really easily, but the G names, there were two of them. It's Gimel something. I think it's Gimeltur and Gimelkar? Those ones get me every time I suck at them. I swear I'm not drunk. Right? No, I feel that. Speaking of, though, I actually have I have a spicy beverage in my fridge that I totally want to tap into a little today. Nothing crazy. I am not a heavy drinker. The drunkest you will ever see me is in Don Marshall's Patreon for Tipsy Tolkien. Because by the end of that, I had like 7 shots in me. Because I had a really big thing of alcohol that I had pre-mixed, and it's mostly juice and not alcohol. But, you know, you take enough in and it just sort of adds up. I had like 2 mixed drinks worth of... 3 mixed drinks worth of alcohol during Tipsy Tolkien. So if you want to see me tipsy, like, there you go. Join Don's Patreon. But typically I don't drink at all. I didn't even have booze in my house until he asked me to be on Tipsy Tolkien. I'm like, dang, I gotta buy booze. I don't have any. Other than the occasional drink at a restaurant that I'd had, I hadn't drinking at home in over 2 years. That's kind of impressive, now that I think about it. It'd been about 2 years since I'd had a drink at home. So, yeah, I'm really not a drinker. Gonna use it as an excuse to not read the histories yet. Don't want to get him mixed up with the Silm. Yeah, to a certain extent, that's totally valid. Because, yeah, the history of Middle-earth, when you read all of, like, the previous drafts of things where all the characters have different names, but you know it's meant to be the same characters, like Tinwelint. Tinwelint is Thingol's name in the Lay of Leithian, when it was Leithian and not Luthien. So, yeah, like, a bunch of things change. Originally, Daeron was Luthien's brother, and then that changed into him just being a random elf that loved her. And so some of that stuff gets messy. It gets messy in your brain if you're not careful. So yeah, that's valid. Totally valid. Ooh, adult milkshake. Gosh, I haven't had like a frozen cream-based drink with booze in it for ages. Ages and ages. Yeah, just the parts you're interested in. No, that's legit. I think I only read through the Shaping of Middle-earth all the way through, cover to cover. The rest I've probably referenced the entirety of the other books at some point, because I'm just curious like that, and I like to look shit up. But yeah, I don't think I've read the others cover to cover. I want to go back and reread volumes 10, 11, and 12, because that's mostly First Age stuff. Because that's the Peoples of Middle-earth, Morgoth's Ring, and brain fart. Total brain fart. Can't even remember. But the last 3 volumes. I know it's Morgoth's Ring, War of the Jewels, and the Peoples of Middle-earth. 10, 11, and 12. Those 3 volumes I do want to read cover to cover again. It's been a long time. Been a long time for those 3. But the Lays of Leithian, the Lay of Leithian and the Lays of Beleriand, which is book 3 of the History of Middle-earth, I am going to use those for ASMR streams, I think, because I think that'd be really fun. So after next weekend, because we will be finished with the Silmarillion, I'm going to take a break and do some of the Lays of Beleriand in ASMR format. So there will be tingles, there will be relaxing music, and there will be reciting of Tolkien's poetry with whispers and elvish and all the nice things. All the nice things. That's what we're gonna do. So that's not this next weekend, but like weekend after that. So in 2 weeks we'll start doing that. Also, it might start tomorrow if I have everything prepped. I'm going to start doing crafting streams because I got a new cross-stitch pattern. I stumbled upon it on Etsy and I couldn't say no to it. So I bought the pattern, I bought the fabric, and I bought all of the flosses and everything. So I have everything prepped to start a big cross-stitch project. And when I say big, I mean big. It's over 100,000 stitches. Like, it's pretty hefty. But I'm going to start that because it actually fits in my bedroom scheme, which I know looks really yellowed in the videos because of my lighting. But my room is like blues and cream colors. It's blues and creams mostly. And so I found a cross-stitch pattern that is the elves going west, and it's all in these blues and white creamy tones. So it's perfect for my bedroom. I'm gonna cross-stitch that bitch, frame it, put it up on my wall. Like, I'm ready. I'm ready to start that project. So I may be starting that tomorrow, and we'll do some general stitch and bitch sessions. If I schedule it into my stream schedule, it guarantees that I will at least work on the thing once a week. Because otherwise I'll work on it solidly for a week, my hands will get tired, and then I won't touch it for months. So if I schedule it once a week, I am hoping that I will be regular enough to actually complete the thing. But that gives me a chance to do just some general chatting, lore chatting streams. So we'll do that with the crafting, and it'll be fun. So that is the plan. Thank you guys for staying with me. We chatted for quite a bit after this, but that was the Akalabath. Next weekend will be of the Rings of Power in the Third Age, and that'll be the last stream for the Silmarillion. So thank you guys for chillaxing with me. Yeah, you gotta schedule it in. You gotta make it a habit, or else it just falls apart. And trust me, that's what usually happens for me. I tend to start things and then not finish them. It's a very Aries tendency of mine. Because I take astrology with a huge grain of salt, but I am very much like what would stereotypically be expected of a double Aries. Guilty as charged. I got that chaotic energy. Totally chaotic neutral. Which is why I love Sauron so much. But, yeah, so we'll be starting the crafting streams probably tomorrow, ? We'll see. I might not make them on Sundays regularly. I might do them midweek as well, or maybe 2 days a week if I'm feeling up to it. But I want to make sure that I do a craft stream at least once a week, whatever day it ends up being on, so that I continue making progress on the project. But I have to prep the fabric today if I'm going to stream it tomorrow, so we can actually start. So we're going to prep the fabric. I want to stitch around all the edges to make sure that things don't fray. I don't have a sewing machine, so I can't just serge the edges like some people do. Which is when you make like an actual well done seam on a sewing machine. I can't serge edges, so I will probably just do either a blanket stitch or a whip stitch. I'm not sure. Either way, I'll stitch around the edges to keep them from fraying, and then I'm probably going to either grab a pencil, like a mechanical pencil, or I don't think I want to do a fabric pen. I could, but I worry about fabric pens. Pencil always comes out, at least, when you wash it. So I'm going to take pencil and I'm going to grid my fabric, which means counting 10 holes and then making a grid line. If I do that accurately, it will really come in handy. It will really come in handy when I'm counting things and putting stitches and stuff, so I don't mess up as often. You want to get into knitting? Yeah, physically creating something is satisfying, even when it's completely, like, you know, it's artistic. It's busy work. You still get a really nice sense of accomplishment when you finish a project like that. I have a ton of diamond paintings I need to do too. I bought those with the intent of doing them for ASMR streams, and I still might do that. I have everything for them. It would be really cool, but none of them are Lord of the Rings based, and I feel like I want to stay on brand, and maybe I'll get like a gigantic thing of Rivendell and make that a diamond painting. I have nowhere to put it in here. Maybe I'll sell it or give it away on the channel if I get enough followers to warrant something like that. But I would love to do diamond painting too. I enjoy that. I have all of the materials already. Sauron also descended from desiring order and desiring chaos. Yeah, chaos. But I am your stereotypical double Aries. I am Sun and Ascending sign Aries. And I have a Libra moon. So I am perpetually imbalanced, but always yearning for balance emotionally. It's a lifetime struggle. But it's pretty accurate to my character, so yeah, I start a lot of things that I don't finish. I need just enough structure to keep me focused. But that'll be the goal. So I'll try and prep my fabric today so that we can do some of the fun crafting tomorrow. I hope you guys have an awesome day. Thank you for chilling with me for so long. And yeah, one more stream to the Silm, you guys. This is exciting. So everybody, please take care. I will see you guys next week. And I'll probably see you tomorrow for a craft stream. So if you're here just for Silm Saturday, see you next Saturday. Bye, guys. I love you all. Bye.